Welcome to another episode of Kevin Unscripted. I'm wearing glasses and looks like there's some reflection on there, but I'm gonna have to deal with it for now until I get different camera angles. But next, our upcoming guest is Stephen Beard, who is the owner of Beards Brewing in Fort St. John, established in 2017. Stephen wanted to source many of the ingredients locally and was able to do so and source them out through BC producers that are able to supply all of the hops and all but two of the malts used in the brewing process. Our conversation covers a lot of ground ranging in topics, and I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy this one. I sure enjoyed meeting Stephen. Not all of it's good news. Been using different recording programs, and it seems like when it comes to video there's quite a learning curve. So on this one, I've got some notes here. This episode went for 3 hours and 15 minutes, but the video froze an hour and 38 minutes into it, and kept it going just with the audio for 2 hours and 48 minutes. So if you want to capture the end of this episode and you're watching it now on YouTube or video, go over to Spotify or Apple or any other platform, and you can finish the rest of the episode off. We did do like a little bit of a giveaway at the end. You guys can engage in if you're interested, and hopefully you do. And I thought I'd also do a couple of little shout outs to some sponsors. Well, not sponsors. I'm not sponsored on this episode, but some people I thought I'd give some shout outs to. One is a local company with an online business called Can Have Today. I'm just going to show the screen here. Here you go. Can Have Today. This is their website, and it's a skincare product owned by Colin Willabortza, and yes, that is my brother. That's why I want to give a shout out. He's done an amazing job of putting this all together. Skincare products that have been FDA approved, infused with all kinds of varying essential oils that have healing properties. As you can tell, there's 4 products here, 3 of which are sold out. They're flying off the shelf. I mean, he's got all kinds of reviews here and outlines of the product that will give a lot of information. And I'll stop sharing that. And the second shout out goes to Latitude 56. Latitude 56 is a company that there again is local to this region, Taylor, BC. I'm wearing one of their hoodies right now. I think this one here is Tiger Cats. I don't know if you can see that emblem here. Mike is in the way. But this is also their website, Latitude 56. It's an apparel company, and they've got all kinds of hats. They've got hoodies, t-shirts, mugs here. You go through their website, and if you want to get some graph, with their company name on it, you can do so. Just check out their website, Latitude 56 custom.ca. And those are the 2 shout outs to a couple local companies. And onward with the show. Hopefully you enjoy, guys.
I feel like taking a selfie of this setup.
You should.
A very professional looking space here. I'm impressed.
Oh, are we going to do selfies? Perfect. Yeah. Live.
A live selfie. There we go.
All right. Well, Stephen Beards with an
Beard.
S. Is it Beard?
Well, Beards Brewing.
Yeah.
But I'm just Stephen Beard.
Stephen Beard.
Yeah.
No, perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to this. Thanks for coming on to the show.
I appreciate the invite.
We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff, but I think Beards Brewing is going to be, I think, a large part of what we end up talking about with beer and brewery.
Yeah.
Why don't I start out with a little bit of an overview of who you are? Like I said, I've got something written down, and we can just kind of start with that and see how things play out.
Who I am. That's a lot. Depends how layered we go here. Essentially,
hold on, I'll read this. You tell me if I got it. Okay. So you are Stephen Beard, Stephen with the PH.
Yes, Mom just decided to make life difficult for me, and
fair enough. You get into the spelling and make it
Well, or you're
unique.
called Stefan or whatever it is over time. Lots of people. I've had to spell my name pretty much nonstop my whole life.
Well, if it means anything, Beard for the last name is actually not that bad. That's pretty cool.
Oddly enough, I have to spell that more than my first name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people decide Baird, Baird, or
Oh.
I've come to just say Stephen Beard, like the facial hair on your face.
And then it sticks.
Yeah, then people understand. Oh, I know how to spell beard.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's how I did it too.
yeah,
So you and your wife and family are huge supporters of hometown for St. John, and also owner of Beards Brewing, which was built upon the idea of working with local producers in order to source many of the ingredients needed to produce a unique flavor of the brews. All of the hops and all but two of the malts are used in the process of growing are sourced here in BC. In March 2017, the ideal brewing equipment required to bring Beards Brewing to life was located in Roseland, BC, which is actually I've got
Roslyn.
Is it
Just outside of
Roseland?
Trail? Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna share that here real quick because that's a bit of an interesting place.
Yeah, I'd never been, to be honest. I drove there essentially to learn how to brew on the bigger system. I was just a home brewer
Right here. So
before that.
this is where we are.
It's up us.
And this is where Roseland is.
Yeah, Rosalind.
Roseland, sorry.
No worries.
Right along
I
the
may
border
be
here.
pronouncing it wrong as well.
So this is between Creston and Grand Forks.
Yeah, you basically have to go to
Grand
trail
Forks.
and then climb a steep grade. I borrowed a friend's gooseneck and drove down there and loaded up all the equipment onto a trailer and drove it up to Fort St. John. It was pretty sketchy, almost overheated the pickup.
Oh, really?
The pull was more than I anticipated, and I had a lot of stainless steel equipment, basically a big investment in secondhand equipment, and drove it up here and had some friends who helped load it into a shop bay, which we had converted into a brewery, and kind of like your incredible space here, just a labor of love and some passion and a dream to create our first craft brewery in the north.
So the combination of where the equipment was, because down near Creston, you're pretty much the foothills of the Rockies.
Yeah.
And then stainless steel equipment. How much of this equipment was it? All one unit, or is that a fairly big setup?
Yeah. So essentially, it was a big gooseneck trailer. We had the brew house itself, which is a giant 4-burner stove, 400,000 BTU gas stove.
Like a boiler?
No, it's a 4-burner stove essentially. So it has big gas burners, and we had to upgrade the gas line into the building.
Oh, wow.
We kind of brew how brewing's been brewed for thousands of years at big pots, stirring it. If we cackled like witches and threw on honestly, that's the visual. That
must have quite the aroma coming off
quite the aroma. Yeah, all that warm grain, and you've got a boiling batch on one side, and then it's a double brew day. So essentially, it's 100 to 125 pounds of grain in each pot, and you have a kind of a mirror system going on.
Well, are you doing that now, even like with the temperature outside?
Absolutely. We
35 below. Oh,
yeah.
Man. What do you do with all that humidity?
Well, it feels nice and warm, but we've got a vent hood over top of the system that tries to suck out most of the moisture. And other than that,
you don't get condensation build up on windows.
No, not really. It's so hot, and with that vent hood right over top, it sucks it right up and kicks it outside.
You definitely invested in some decent equipment.
Yeah, we had to. Most of it came, but we added an extra motor, an extra blower on the vent hood just to be able to kick out some of that moisture. And most of the equipment was installed by myself. Had to have a real steep learning curve. We're a brewery on a budget, to be honest. I have a full-time job. We didn't get partners we decided to do this, just my wife and I, try something new. To be honest, looking back, I don't think I was necessarily looking for a business or a brewery. I was looking for a new challenge. The fire department, I had been there for over 10 years at the time, and was just looking for something to get that creative juices going, that new passion, as I think so many people are searching for on their journey.
Not many people have an interest with one particular thing enough to be able to take on a challenge and an investment, both financially and personal time, for something like that. Like there must have been a lot more to it than, just I think the passion for brewery. There must have been, I think, what that entails with the nuance of obviously starting a restaurant. That must, are you a social person by nature when it comes to having people at home and kind of catering, or is it, or providing entertainment
Yes and
or
no.
socializing?
I think for me, the brewery was wanting to give back to this community that I grew up in. So we moved up to Fort St. John when I was in kindergarten. For my dad worked for Imperial Oil. He was flying around looking for abandoned well sites. Ended up operating for them, and this community, we came up here with nothing. We started from scratch. Last time NDP came to power, Dad got laid off, and essentially I watched my parents start from scratch all over again when I was in my early teens, where, we lost the house and we're renting, and Dad went without a job for 8 months before he ended up heading over to Russia to teach the Russians how to use all the Canadian technology that they had purchased.
Really?
Yeah, he
What technology? What Canadian technology?
So
What?
lots of drilling technology,
Oh, in the oil
lots
and
of,
gas industry.
yeah. So
Wow.
Dad
The
did
oil and
that.
gas industry doesn't leave anybody untouched, eh?
It doesn't. No, no. I started in the patch at 16 back when Highland was up and running. Just you used to get your tickets, show up, and
Away you
essentially
go.
away you'd go. Yeah. So welders helping. I did some pressure testing. When minimum wage was 5.50, they were paying $19 to show up and be willing to work. So that was
Minimum wage is 5.50 and they're paying 19. That's a
yeah.
huge jump.
Well, and it was a no brainer. So
Yeah.
I'm impressed that I was able to graduate with the grades I did, because for grade 11 and 12, unfortunately, I most weekends work in the patch Friday, Saturday, Sunday, sometimes Monday, and then just try to catch up through the rest of the week for school.
What was it like? So first, your dad, he got into the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, he was a petroleum technologist. He went to school for it
Oh,
in
okay.
like Devon and
Yeah.
Calgary.
And he got into that for long enough to where he was now able to go to Russia to be able to help train other people that were developing, I guess, the industry, or was just within the company and they were just kind of growing with internally within that company.
Yeah, essentially they bought a bunch of newer technology, and their production wasn't reaching what they expected from the technology. So they hired people like Dad to go over, and initially it was intended to be a short contract where they just trained them, but the company kicked all the expats out, and as soon as they did, their production dropped. So then Dad was hired back essentially to manage a lot of these companies just to keep production up. And he ended up working all over, really. Kazakhstan, Russia.
Wow.
He traveled really for years, a month there, a month home. So that was my.
There's another example of how the industry, especially, Northeast BC, uh, it, the cutting edge when it comes to technology like that, because that's not a unique, I think, story when it comes to a lot of Canadians right now, going down to wherever, especially crossing the border into the States, down into North Dakota and whatnot.
All of our rigs.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a higher level of, I think, technology and approach when it comes to being able to just kind of do day-to-day operations.
We do
Their
it better
standards
than
are.
anyone else in the world.
Isn't that odd to say though? When I started realizing that, I was like, look, nobody hardly knew where Fort St. John was not even 20 years ago.
One,
And yet we're the leading edge in that technology. And most people, like I'm thinking before that, like many, I was thinking Texas, right? Because they're the ones that were
by
kind of,
volume, yes, but Texans also, the Wild Wild West, they got to get away with stuff that in our area, our safety measures, our dual redundancy
yeah,
systems. One of the things that Dad definitely shared was how backwards a lot of the world is still extracting these this essential product
yeah.
essentially.
I still talk to quite a few people, and even to this day, they tell me stories about how things are done in other places, and it's like, man, is that ever wild? You're going back in time a long time, like we're talking 10, 15 years, which doesn't sound like a long time, but 10, 15 years ago, did we have cell phones?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot happens in a very short period of time.
Even just our environmental, it's one of the things that's frustrating for me in our province is most of our population comes from a very small area that is so disconnected from this abundance that we're sitting on. We do it safer, smarter, more environmentally responsible than really anywhere in the planet, at least
Yeah.
from what I've been able to see. One of the stories Dad shares was he was working for a Chinese company briefly, and they drilled through a community of 200,000's water table and just walked away.
Mm, wow.
It was a Chinese company, and they were able to.
Yeah.
They were in a country where you could get away with that. They're all the extra layers of casing. What we did at Sangel with cementing and then drilling through and then pounding pipe through that. There's just so much that we do better than anybody on this planet, and yet our own province has really curbed and slowed our own abundance.
I
And
think part of that is because of lack of understanding,
absolutely,
and that's where even now, I guess, touching on the fact that we're even doing video, I'd like to touch on that because you get someone on to show, like, have you seen on Discovery Channel, they have the computers where they'll kind of show you how they'll do something, they'll reenact
yeah,
something.
they'll
Highway to Hell shows that quite
absolutely,
often.
yeah,
Like
where
they'll
you
have
can see
a
the
scene.
dynamics of
Wouldn't that be cool to have an episode where we can actually show, those
what's
nuances?
happening underground of what we're trying to do
How
to
do we protect
protect
the
our
freshwater
environment.
table? How do we,
Yes,
like,
yeah,
what are the checks and
yeah,
balances, and how is the government involved? We're fighting a lot of things in negative ways,
yeah,
but there's some other elements like OGC and whatnot that have brought, I think, a lot in check with
yeah.
surface casing vents and how we go about abandoning wells. Even some of the original drills, with we don't do a lot of seismic like we used to anymore,
Well, when
and that
Dad
was a
first
huge
came up
impact
here,
on environment.
he was flying in a helicopter just looking for abandoned wells where they used to just weld a cap on it and leave.
Yeah.
It's what used to happen even in our own area. This is obviously 70s. Um, we would never consider that now. And they were looking for it because technology had got to the point where they could bring these wells back to life and still grab some product as well as shut them out in properly. And
One of the incentives that the government did that is very effective is that they withheld, like any company, they have to grow. They have shareholders,
yeah,
right? So you have to show an
responsibility.
increase.
Yeah, it's
So
that
the way to
corporate.
do that is control how many drilling licenses are given, and to be able to get a new drilling license, to be able to excel or kind of capitalize in a certain area, you have to show uh, abandonment projects that are still on the books, and there's a percentage you have to keep in check, and
Yeah,
if you don't, then they start pulling the drilling away, and it's a slow death, right? So it's a very powerful incentive to make sure that you're cleaning up the tail end, reclamation and all that kind of
as you
stuff,
should be.
abandonments, exactly, to be able to move forward. And so that was, I think, one of the that I'm aware of where you started to really see a big shift, and people, you know uh, maybe not even aware of what they had through acquisitions and whatnot. So they'd go up in a helicopter, just make sure that there weren't a lot of things going unnoticed.
Yeah. Well, and in British Columbia, I find like our population is in the Lower Mainland. Kootenays a bit, but mainly the Lower Mainland. And there's been a concerted effort to almost discredit our own abundance to a certain extent. And it's really challenging because we want all these social programs, and we want good roads, and we want abundant, vibrant communities. And what I saw, or what I'm seeing over the past few years, is a real challenging situation where we've shut down a lot of our access to that abundance, and yet we want more than ever.
Standard of living is supposed to be maintained, if not increased, and yet at the cost of what?
Well, and for our kids, I think this is the first generation that we're almost anticipating that they won't do better than their parents, which to me is scary and sad. We always want the next generation to do a little bit better than us. It's why we work so hard to give them that opportunity. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of them aren't going to have that opportunity.
There's a very good chance of it. The future's got uncertainties. I think that are more aware with people that are a little bit more rural, and they're dealing with elements that I think most people don't typically deal with. And so that by the nature of it, forces people to have a different way of thinking, critical thinking, or awareness. And then on top of that, it's also, I think, experiences and awareness of what has happened, in their lifetime and even their parents' lifetime that maybe the younger generation isn't quite aware of quite yet. People really do get wrapped up into their own bubble, and the only way they become a lot more aware of what's going on is when they're affected individually. And you see that disconnection when it comes to maybe realities on the environment and the industries and how that's I think done, but then also politics and some of the things that have a huge effect in our day-to-day lives that we never really thought we would ever have to deal with. And then in our opinions really don't really have much of a change unless you're in a position where you're part of a social warrior movement of some kind, right? Where that does have a huge impact on things. But as far as an individual voice, I don't think anybody feels that what they have to say is got any weight behind it.
Yes and no. That rural aspect absolutely, I think, changes the dynamic. You see, I know you've been involved with the convoy and with a lot of that movement. And as much as I don't think it's going to, the 1% is in power right now, and our ability to push back against that when even the inquiry that's happening is being done by the people in power. There's some disconnects there. At the same time, I think that communities have kind of come together as controversial and polarizing as politics and so much is. I do think that there's more that binds us together that we have in common than we have different. And often it's one or two hot topics that creates the divide. Right now, guns, the rifle stuff that's going on. And again, our region has such a different view on that because we're in the middle of the hunting where, people fill their freezers with what they hunt for. And I know the hunters in my circle, if you take any time to get to know a hunter, most of them are more environmentally conscious, more aware of what's going on in the wilderness than half the people running the studies, because they're right there. They care about it. They know, like I know, how much effort goes into harvesting food, and we're so disconnected from I buy my meat from the store, as if in some way that's more ethical or more responsible. And depending where you get your meat from, especially where the masses live, they're, cattle that's not really having a great life. It's not any more responsible, in my opinion. and there's just a disconnect, I think, happening. And
Yeah.
up here in the north, being that rural aspect, well, really that ties back to where we started. That's what started the brewery. It was I loved craft beer. My wife gifted me for Christmas a home brewing kit, and I was shocked at how repeatable a recipe was and how subtle adjustments in ingredients made massive changes in flavors. And we didn't have a craft brewery, and I decided, you know what? To be honest, I was sick and bored for a couple weeks, and I don't do well bored. And I came up with this crazy idea, priced it out, and the cost of the equipment was ludicrous. So I decided, well, I guess that's a dream that's not going to come to fruition. And happened months later upon a site of used equipment where Roslyn, BC, where you pulled up where we began, essentially had all their equipment for sale, um, almost everything, because they were upgrading. They were going to the next level up. And I wrote them, they were willing to teach me how to brew on that larger system. And so I went down 4 months before I ended up grabbing the equipment and learning how to brew on a bigger level, and literally just was winging it. Passion, drive, and the willingness to learn to fail.
So I've got that actually part on here. We can even get right back to the beginning.
There we go.
Yeah,
Loop
that
us
was
back.
yeah. But that part is what I find the most fascinating. Right? We went off on, I think, really kind of got a lot of things figured out as far as how you got back into why you got into brewing. Here it says you made the trek, like you said, down to learn how to grow your home brewed his home brewing skills to a larger scale and operation. A few months later, made a 16-hour trek south one more time to load the equipment on a trailer and transport home just off the historic Alaska Highway in Fort St. John. The summer and fall of 2017, after renovations and installing equipment, the first 4 brews were in the fermenters. In November of 2017, I guess 5 years ago,
Yeah.
pretty much, Beards Brewing Company opened their doors to the first customer as North BC's first craft brewery. So there you go. That got you right into. So the brewing aspect, going back to when you went down there, and you said you spent about 4 months learning all of this stuff.
No, I got a brew day.
A brew day.
Yeah.
A crash course.
A crash course. Yeah. So it's the interesting thing about beer.
Was that with this equipment though? Like before they tore it down and upgraded?
Exactly.
So you were able to actually put your hands on this.
I went down
while it was in the process before dismantling and moving
my
it up here.
exact equipment, and it was secondhand to them. It actually started on the island. I'm not sure which brewery, but it was their second system. So they started on actually one size down from ours at Roslyn. I believe that's how it went. And so they bought this equipment used, and brewing, as much as it's exploded, part of that is that it is craft. It's like baking bread, subtle adjustments in ingredients. Our water, you could brew our exact recipes somewhere else, and based on the minerals, the different aspects of that water, because we're not using reverse osmosis dead water and then adding stuff as lots of breweries have to, depending on what minerals are in their water. Being that all of our water is really high level, it brings out its own flavors within it. And beer's been around for thousands of years. It's the oldest written recipe of any kind is a beer recipe. It's a clay tablet, 7,000 years old. It has 4 recipes on it. Egyptian pharaoh, 10,000 BC, has been found with clay pots of a fermented beer. It was a corn ale in it. It's been around for a lot of human history. And
I did a little section here that I thought we'd get into later, because
okay.
sparked by you.
Yeah.
Because your website with like different stats, and to speak to what you're talking about as far as the history, and to kind of make it a little bit more Canadian. The one little stat that I came across was that Canadian beer is actually older than Canada. In fact, beer production in the Great White North predates Confederation by 200 years.
Absolutely.
That's just in Canada alone.
Well, Plymouth Rock in the States, a little tidbit, that wasn't the stop. Um, they literally stopped at Plymouth because they ran out of fermentables. They ran out of beer. It had nothing to do with this is where we're gonna set up our first establishment. It was on the way to Virginia. They stopped at Plymouth Rock to essentially get more beer ingredients.
Really?
The very first road in North America, in colonized North America, I should say, was a farm area to a brewery. It started the agriculture revolution. It wasn't food that initially started us planting. It was beer. It was grains.
Really?
Yeah, and because it was so multi-purpose, you can make bread after you take out some of the sugars and make beer. It's if you look at the history of it's way older than wine. It's way more complicated. It used to be magic, how they didn't understand until quite recently in our history how it even became beer, because the wort, the sweet liquid that comes from the grains essentially would magically become beer from wild yeast that just blew on the breeze and
Really?
yeah.
How did you learn all this? Just because you're in the industry and you start picking up stuff through conversation?
Yeah, some research. I became passionate about it. Actually, it was a book I read that was talking about how the Romans, when they used to do their forced marches and they couldn't carry enough food, would give 2 pints of beer to the soldiers for a forced all-day march, and there was enough nutrient value in that ale to force a whole army to continue moving. They were often paid
enough nutrient. It wasn't just a way of being able to bribe them.
No, well, that was probably part of it. But to be honest, commercial beer has taken away all of those nutrients because they want you to be able to consume as many beers as possible. But historically, beers like our beers have short chain proteins, have B vitamins, have all sorts of nutrients that are good for your brain, your body.
Oh man,
it's the excessive drinking and the higher alcohol content.
I was gonna say
that
you're gonna be able to give, I think, a lot of people an argument for being able to drink every day.
Well, and it's interesting because I always get, beer makes me fat, and I drink my beer a lot. I have it on tap in my garage, and I feel, in my 40s, I'm in incredible shape. It's not the beer that makes you gain the weight. It's the choices you make when you've drank too many beers. It's, the late night McDonald's or the, those sort of choices that contribute to that. And then unfortunately with the commercial beers, there aren't any of those nutrients. They filter out everything but the water, a tiny bit of flavor, and the alcohol.
The processed.
Absolutely.
It gets right back to, I think, just about everything else. Yeah. The process takes all the good stuff out, and it leaves us with the stuff that we crave.
Well, and they want you to be able to consume more. And if you have our beers, you won't be able to consume as much because you have to actually digest them. The soluble fiber that's in there. There's stuff in there that you won't be going to the washroom like you would with, I won't mention any in case, but with certain commercial beers that are designed literally to go through you as quick as possible and to change your state. We're all looking for those changes of state. I think that's part of why I became a firefighter, is looking for those challenges. Whatever your passion is, so many people, whether you're quadding, hunting, fishing, you're looking just to get out of that loop of life, that rat race almost that so many of us spend a lot of our journey in.
Kind of, I don't know if it's a good analogy, but comfort food, almost like beer and just drinks in particular. I think it has a little bit of a social dynamic and a bit of a comfort feeling that goes along with it. It's a very social thing to be doing.
It's a social lubricant.
Exactly.
Absolutely. We're all, on the spectrum of extroverted to introverted, and if you are more to the introverted side, a couple drinks allows some of those inhibitions, some of that inner self-talk to die down, and that outward vocal talk to increase.
Absolutely. That is understated, I think, even with people who think that they're so introverted that they would survive for long periods of time in the wilderness alone. But there is such a thing as cabin fever. It's a real deal because humans, whether you're wherever you sit on that spectrum you just talked about, whether you're extreme introvert, you still need interaction with other human beings.
Absolutely.
Conversation is so more important than I think people realize.
We not just for conversation itself, but I think for our mental well-being, the ability to decompress about your day, the ability to process so
categorize and process thought.
Yeah, and learn from your elders. And yeah. I'm in a weird place at the fire hall where I've been around for 17 years now, and I'm starting to be one of those old gray hairs, although I don't picture myself that way. It's the natural progression of things.
You're getting sold now that when you refer to old people, you're in that age group.
Well, it's weird. I'm at the age where when I was hired, the members that I looked at as the old guys is the age I'm at now. And
I know what you're feeling.
It's a hard thing to wrap my brain around, because to be honest, the pilot inside of this meat suit is still my 18-year-old self, my 26-year-old self, my 32-year-old self. It's this thing I'm walking around in that seems to be getting older, and I wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, I am getting older. But I also think along your journey, you get to learn these lessons that maybe you can pass on to the younger members, or to people in the community, or that's one of my real passions, is that ability to give back, to make better those around you, those win-win situations.
That, I think, part of where that priorities shift, and that becomes something now of a new priority, self-fulfillment when you get older, that you want to actually give back more, because it switches from the learning to now you're part of the giving, and instills, I think, values that you hold dear to yourself, to other people. And that's why people, when they get a little bit older, it does shift, and they get more involved in certain things they never used to when they were younger.
Well, and we are so rural here. What I found about staying in Fort St. John, and it's funny, when I graduated, I left the morning after wet grad, which we actually had back then, and swore I'd never come back, and have lived in LA and Calgary and traveled the world. And one of the things that I found when I did end up back here, which was supposed to be for one winter, was that sense of community still exists in the rural parts of our province. Where we are all alone up here, essentially. And
did you not see that until you left and come back? Was that what the mechanism was?
I was not aware of it. No, when you're in your teens, or at least when I was in my teens, I was pretty selfish. I didn't see, all I knew is that I wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, and kind of never look back. I saw all the things that our community lacked, and didn't really focus on the sense of community, which creates a community, which is often lacking in the bigger centers, where you don't know your neighbors. You live in this high rise where you may pass people in the elevator and not even nod or say hi. My wife laughs. I can't go to the grocery store without adding 20 minutes for socialization, because that's just part of living in a community our size. And, it's through traveling, through leaving, through seeing how blessed we are simply to be born in Canada, to be born in a part of Canada that has the ability to chase dreams, the ability to create abundance, the ability to risk, maybe fail and start again. That isn't something that's available everywhere. And it took leaving, I think, to really recognize that and to appreciate it in a whole new way.
I'm glad you said that, because this area has that consistent battle, I think, of the ones who have a tremendous appreciation for this region and area. But there's a lot of people that, would rather just leave. I think most people come here by nature for 6 months. Yeah, it's a 6 month plan that ends up being 20, 30 years, right? Yeah. And you don't realize the value in this area until you've been here for a while. And I think that's where the term came in. If you drink the water, you're going to end up returning.
Yeah.
And that's true for a lot of people. I don't
Absolutely.
know how to put a finger and description on something like that, but I think the ones who eventually start to really have a deep sense of appreciation for this region are the ones who've been here for quite some time, and it's a bit of a slower transition. And you don't necessarily see that until maybe you've left and then you've come back, and then there's just different things that you took for granted that you never realized were here.
There's still opportunity here. I think one of the things that's missing in some of the larger centers is that feeling that you have to be a cog in somebody else's motor and someone else's machine. And although you can also choose that path here, that we're small enough that if you want to try something, you can. There's not 1,000 other breweries, there's not 1,000 other businesses. And one of the things that I love about the craft brewing industry in particular is we don't look at each other as competition. We're Budweiser, Coors, Miller, all owned by the same giant corporation, InBev, which owns Global Beer. That's our competition. They still have the greatest market share. Even in our own community, the vast majority are going to be drinking those commercial beers. We've been marketed them since we were little. We've seen, that the cute girls pay attention to us when we have one of those in our hands. And, we don't want flavor in our beer, and we don't want anything but to try to let go of our senses and change states. And so that's our competition. We're trying to beat that, conditioning that essentially we've been hit with since we were little. That those are the beers you drink. And it's why you're seeing a craft beer revolution. And to be honest, once you switch to craft, it's sometimes hard to go back, just because you do realize that, we have beers that have apricot flavors and melon flavors and coffee and chocolate and honey, and you can support local. As you mentioned in the beginning, we try to make sure that our ingredients are supporting our economy, which then trickles down to everything else. More money that can be spent in our region, in our province, in our country, that benefits us all. And to me, it was never about creating abundance. It was more about trying something new and giving back in a way that may have an impact both on our community and on my kids' lives down the road.
Well, you touched on the craft, or I guess the microbrewery aspect, which I think is a growing trend. And in that trend, it does have, I think, it encapsulates a certain region or town because of what you were talking about earlier. It's whether it be the water or some of the ingredients that are common in just the art of making beer, but brings on taste and nuance specific to that area, much like Scotch, for an example. Absolutely. Is still a whiskey, but Scotch in Scotland is kind of its own thing because of the water and exactly. So craft and microbrews are finding a niche that is, I think, an increasing trend as people start getting a little bit more aware and knowledgeable about the brewery and how beer is even made. And I think what really draws it in is the historical part of it too. When you know a history on a thing, and that's what I found with Scotch is not really something it's an acquired taste, let me tell you.
Absolutely.
But once you get to know the history and the craft behind it, all of a sudden now it's something that is part of the drink itself.
You can appreciate those nuances of where it came from.
Yeah, almost tastes different.
Absolutely.
To the point of where now you actually have a preference on maybe certain brands or maybe where it was brewed, because you have an understanding of that certain brand or nuance that you seem to appreciate over other beer or scotches in this case.
Absolutely. Well, and it's not for everyone. My wife doesn't drink beer. She, to this day, is that one's bad. That one's really bad. When she goes down the line of our little flights. But I'm super blessed that she was willing to support me in, my endeavor and be that foundation, which I think you need if you're going to start something like that. We also have all sorts of different drinks at the brewery. We still just yesterday got a call. Do you have anything other than beer? And of course, we've got scotches and wines and hard liquors and mixes and lots of non-alcoholic, kid-friendly. We always wanted it to be an everyone welcome location. So we have lots of salesmen that bring in customers during the day, and we'll just sit and have a chat, and that kind of more relaxed atmosphere. And it really has just been a labor of love, and with the intent where we don't have those shareholders saying we want that 10% increase,
Yeah.
that 5% increase. We honestly have turned down a lot of work simply because I want the work-life balance at this stage of my life. I've got an amazing family, two amazing kids, and I want to make sure that I have some time for them. That, time is the most precious commodity I have at this part of my journey, and I want to make sure I'm spending it where I should be, and
We
not just
touched on that a little
the
bit, didn't we? When
abundance.
everyone's schedule is so busy right now that for you to be able to do something, you quite literally have to take something out to be able to replace it with something that it's prioritizing. So family, work, all these different things that you have to fit within a lifestyle, I
Yeah,
guess.
absolutely.
It's a
That's
little bit tricky.
Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't read it, to anyone out there, I definitely suggest it, or even just Google it.
Oh, let's Google the hell out of that. Let's do it.
I've been blessed to have a desire to constantly self grow and continue to try to learn. And one of the things I found, I took a couple leadership courses through the city recently, and they had multiple courses on his book, which is quite old. And essentially, one of the ones is that time management. He likes to draw out a 4-quadrant box where you've got important and non-important on the top, and then urgent and non-urgent. And for a while on my life journey, I was spending a lot of time putting out fires in that urgent, important category, thinking that, that hustle, by putting out those fires and, staying super, super busy, that I was being effective. But one of the things he really pushes is, one, stay away from the unimportant, non-urgent, those scrolling on your phones, those things that don't really mean anything, but they take time. And try to spend more time in those important, non-urgent things, so that they don't become fires, so that they
putting a structure on time management,
literally front end load. I front end load every day. Try to get as much done by.
You use that term even when we were talking earlier, front end load.
Yeah.
So that's where this came from, was the book?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's, if I can get,
I'm going to share this
enough done to be productive.
Which one is it? This one here?
Yeah, they're all the same. It's all the same book. It's been redone over and over again. And if you go to images, you'll probably see on like Pinterest and stuff like that, there's some breakdowns of, keep going down maybe. That's just the book.
This one
but yeah, so like, be proactive. If you go to that bottom left one, or they have a lot of the little graphics. It's taught in schools now, starting with the end in mind. That's something that our society, we've become, in my opinion, so instant gratification, where we want, we all dream about the lottery win. We all dream about becoming instantly famous or instantly able to do something. And one of the things that I've really come to resonate with lately is, talent is one thing, and talent will bring you to a certain level. But the people in my journey that I've found have been most successful are those that learn to push past their talent, or maybe who are never talented and early on learn to fail and continue, because that willingness to try and maybe not succeed and learn something from it and try again and come back over and over again. To be honest, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and that's the lesson that I really took out of that. Is the only way to get to this level. I never started thinking I'd be at this level, but you have to be willing to fail over and over and over and over, and be okay with that, and let go of the ego, let go of that voice that says perfect or fail.
I think it's confidence is the biggest one. It erodes confidence, and people end up giving up because they're spending a lot of time and effort without seeing a lot of the results. And sometimes the long road is smaller incremental gains that you don't necessarily see. Like when you go to the gym, you're going to feel the pain, and you're going to feel, I think, more of the suffering than you are going to see the success
Yeah.
in the end. But you're not going to see that success, especially one that's noticeable, until, further down the road.
Well, and that's begin with the end in mind. So that's that second principle in there. Essentially, gym is a great analogy. We all want to be healthy. We envision these bodies that stay with us, that we can do our dreams and our passions into our 80s and 90s potentially. But if you don't begin with the end in mind, if you don't feed it good fuel, if you don't exercise, very few people love exercising. Very few people look forward, to having to go through what is a bit of a struggle. There's resistance. Literally, it's resistance training. But what I found is without resistance, there is no growth.
Mm-hmm.
You can't grow a muscle if you don't put resistance on it. And our lives are the same. Whatever you want to be good at, you're going to have to practice it. You're going to have to go through the repetition over and over and over. And sometimes you won't succeed, but that willingness to continue at it, eventually you do get there. And that beginning with the end in mind, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your finances, whether it's your health, your mental well-being. My sister Kelly Beard has a fitness group and a successful fitness company where it's just trying to motivate people to get over their own doubts, their own fears, it's tough to get up and make those choices and
mental
to make
stamina
them over and over and over again when it's way easier. Our society has made it easy to eat unhealthy and easy to just sit on our phones and get an instant gratification, to get an instant rush of adrenaline looking at other people's vacations or other people's adventures, and not actually going out and utilizing their own journey to find those things.
Well, the workload is always at the beginning. On anything that ends up having any form of success, all the work is at the very beginning, and it's never, I think, fully realized except for the person actually doing it.
Yes.
So there's no acknowledgement, there's no satisfaction, there's all work and no play at the very beginning, and then eventually, over a period of time and dedication, that workload starts to get less and less, and you get that flip over into the success and the accomplishment of a thing. But it's working through the suck that allows you to be able to get any form of
embracing the suck.
And exactly,
you have
that's where the skill and the mindset and the tenacity and that builds into character. And that is, I think, what you were talking about earlier, that offsets I think natural ability or skill or talent. Is the ability. Talent's talent, but if you don't end up, imagine if you had the talent and you're able to embrace the suck, so to speak, and work through it and eventually get that workload at the very beginning out of the way. And
those
then eventually,
are our success stories. Those are our professional exactly hockey players. Those are our business owners that, create the abundance. Those are the people that, have a healthy journey. It's that willingness to, talent takes you only to the edge of your talent. After that, hockey is a great example. I played hockey growing up. Not super far, but I found, if you have some initial talent, hockey's easy. You're maybe a little bit better than the other kids, but there is a certain point where the kids that are putting in the repetitions and embracing the suck over and over and over again, they really stretch out ahead. In my age group, those that went on to play professional weren't usually the ones that were initially the most talented, because the most talented, once they got to the edge of their talent and hit some diversity, a lot of them quit. Well, they hadn't learned to embrace that.
The sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, I don't think, is very underrated. And I think that's why you get people who are fixated, and you get the air quote workaholic, is because once you get past that to a certain point of where you've had a taste of success, it's like the ones at the gym. That it is a good analogy, I think, because at the beginning, people don't get into that routine and that sense of satisfaction where you look in the mirror now and you can see the progress, and that drives you, and that becomes a bit of an addictive trait, and that's what drives them to go to the gym, and they fixate and want to do more of it. when you work through something and you start hitting those accomplishments and those milestones and you get those goals and those accomplishments, that has a similar effect where it becomes addictive. Now you want to be able to get to that next goal. And if you don't have that sense of satisfaction and accomplish after a while, especially, for those maybe who kind of failed and they were up fairly high, they get into a depression.
Absolutely.
And you need to get back into it. And people quit before, when the workload is heavy at the beginning and they don't get that sense of accomplishment that drives them to the next step. And the harder you go, the more frequent and more elaborate those successes are. And after a while, you get to like what you're talking about, with the athletes or the bodybuilders, where now you've built something to where it seems unattainable by anybody else. But it's all of those little success stories and workload that after a while, it doesn't seem like a workload.
Yeah. Well,
when you get the achievements to go with it.
Yeah, my sister talks about that a lot on the health side of, you have to somehow find a way to make it a lifestyle. Yeah. If it's a diet, if it's a goal, unfortunately, once you reach that goal, it's usually, oh, I made it. And then you go back to all your old habits.
Yeah, that's just it. The yo-yo diet. I got it. Now I can go back to how it was before. And you end up getting right back to where you were. And that's obviously nowhere you want to be, because if that was so awesome, you would have never actually had the drive to make the change to begin with.
Absolutely. And to be honest, I think that's why I quit hockey. I hit a point where my talent, my work ethic wasn't keeping up with where it needed to be. And I made a, dramatic shift into a whole different journey. And, it's so interesting to be able to look back in retrospect and see that of yourself and, to think, how can I take a life lesson out of that? How can I apply that down my journey to, those things that I am still passionate about, and to take that of, I don't want to go tonight. And jiu-jitsu is a great example. We've got 320-pound students of 7 foot of muscle, and I'm 170 pound 42, almost 43-year-old, and having to deal with these 20 somethings. And
I've got you beat in the age.
Lots of
son of a
that's all right.
I'm that old guy.
No, that's all right. It's good to have some young blood in here.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, you have to, make it a habit of, okay, even though I have all those excuses not to show up, I'm still going to show up.
Yeah.
All those reasons, all those doubts, all those, that darn voice in your head that's like, today, just sit on the couch and have that extra cookie. Don't worry about that. It's, again, starting with that end in mind of, I want to be a healthy 50, 60, 70-year-old. And if I don't take action now, no one's going to do it for you.
So jiu-jitsu was what I think was a foundation to form, I think, a lot of these outlooks that you have.
Absolutely. When I first came to jiu-jitsu, my wife was pregnant with our first child. I didn't really have anything but work at the time, work and home. So it was my wife and I, and we're preparing for this massive change. And I had lost anything for me outside of the hustle. And one of the things that I've found is, if work is a huge passion, that can be enough on its own, but often you do need those things outside of work that allow you to explore those other parts of your personality, whether it's an artistic outlet or whether it's just a challenge, whether it's an adrenal kick, which I think was part of mine, is I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. Being a firefighter creates that in us sometimes, just because we're constantly hit with those adrenals. And jiu-jitsu, it was something where when I first came, I had a bit of ego. I honestly thought that as an athletic 26-year-old, I should be able to apply my will to somebody else. And jiu-jitsu is a funny one where it's all knowledge. We used to be connected to the CrossFit gym, and those are very fit, very athletic, great cardio individuals. And when it comes to fighting and submitting somebody to your will, it's just no competition. It doesn't feel fair. But it took going through those learning process of failing essentially over and over and over to get to that state. And lots of analogies that I now bring to all parts of my journey were learned through that aspect of getting your ego busted over and over and over again. Where this, 130, my son's a great example, 14 years old. Cohen can legitimately tap me. And I'm a, talented practitioner, but once you know the skill, you know the technique, if I don't tap or smash him into a wall, I'm going to sleep.
Wow,
that's how
say
it
that
works.
with pride, eh?
I do. Yeah. It's he came
good.
to it on his own. I never
And
tried
he's
to push
14?
it. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. And he's only been at it for I wish I would have started that early, to be honest. The skill set, I'm at the point where I don't really have to think about it anymore. That's something that I crave out of it as well, is it immerses you completely in the moment. You can't be thinking about your stressors. You can't be thinking about finances or your day or your relationships, because somebody's trying to hurt you. But essentially, we tap, we try to let go of the ego, but you have to be immersed in this moment. And so much of us, we're looking to escape this moment. I think that's what our phones do. Sometimes that's what work is. But as human beings, we crave the ability to be immersed in the moment. Often those things that we do for our passions are searching for that, of the ability to get out of our monkey mind and actually get into the space of where we are and live that moment experience.
And it's a structure. Oil and gas industry, I think in some ways has done it for me too, because you're dealing with, I think, a lot of elements that most people aren't able to handle. And it's the stressors that you were talking about that force you to be able to break down and mitigate in a way where it doesn't become overwhelming.
You have to,
right? It's a skill that you develop. The stress and while you're in Fort St. John, and a lot of things that people complain about are the things that also form strong character. The 40 below to 40 above. Today's, and you're working in the
great example.
Yeah,
it's it builds 36 with a wind chill to 45.
It hardens people.
It forces you to. It also forces you to bind together with other people.
Yeah.
Whether you have a small tribe or a big tribe, you can't survive hibernation alone.
No, that's true. That's true. Let's touch on some. What I'm gonna do here is hit some of these little cool fun facts about the beer, and then bring us back to, I think, I'm curious about the brewing and the craft and microbrewery aspect that you have with Beards.
Okay.
So we could hit it off with some of the fun fact stuff. In Canada, beer has 3 times the economic impact compared to wine and spirits combined. I didn't realize that.
Well, we don't grow a lot of grapes in Canada.
No, it's the Okanagan, I guess the southern border.
That's it, right? And there's so many spin-off things, whether it's our barley, whether it's our hops, whether it's all the companies that we buy our cans and our labels, and the local liquor stores owned by local individuals for the most part, that are selling the products. It's the jobs you create with a pub versus.
That's the other part of this here. It says Canadians spend $9.14 billion on beer in 2013, which is $324 per adult. So 1 out of every 100 jobs in Canada is supported by the sale of beer. The beer economy supports 163,200 jobs throughout Canada.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the first I've heard those numbers. That's impressive.
Local breweries annually purchase 300,000 tons of Canadian malt barley. The notion that Canadian beer is stronger than American beer is actually an urban myth. In fact, Canadian beer is a relative weak when compared to some America's highest alcohol by volume brews. This fallacy begins because alcohol was measured differently in each country, with the US using the alcohol by weight method, while Canada uses the alcohol by volume method, which I thought was pretty interesting. Oh, hi, hon.
I do think that Canadians can consume more than some Americans, just through maybe our cold, long winters. But
What's another one here? Global beer market valued at 623 billion USD dollars. 623 annual,
yeah.
623 billion.
Now, a lot of that is our commercial beer. I don't think that's
Well, no
just
wonder
our
they're
craft.
tapped into making it a business.
Well, that's why they spend so much in marketing.
Jeez. So top, and this is kind of the interesting part because we get into stuff that I really didn't know about, like beer consumption.
Yeah.
So global top four beers, according to Vine Pair, which is actually real quick, I'll share that because that was something I thought was very interesting. Great. Let's do this here. Let's bring this over. Where's Vine? This one? Nope. That one? Nope. This guy. Yes. And then I'll share. Boom. It's gonna take me just a few seconds here. But there. So this website I got a lot of information off, and it's got like the top most valuable beers,
Yep.
popular beers on.
So if you go to
top.
those top valuable beers, unfortunately, that whole list is owned by one corporation.
Yes. So
other than Asahi, I don't.
Or Snow. Snow is a Chinese. So where was that here? This little fun fact here that I was talking about. China consumes the most beer as a whole.
Yes.
Which I didn't realize. And Snow is the top beer in China, but it's the only place you can get that.
Yeah, they brand. Don't export it.
They don't. And yet they're the number one seller globally. So that tells you how many. Yeah, China is a huge beer
and just like here, long day of work. There is something, especially if you're someone who vibrates a little high or operates a bit tense. A beer or two, a glass of wine at the end of the night does allow your system, it's a depressant essentially. And what that means is that it takes you from a higher state and brings it down a little bit. It allows you to relax. It allows you to let go of some of that day. We definitely push healthy drinking habits, not drinking to the point of you having a hangover. If you have a hangover the next day, you're probably consuming.
That's too much.
Yeah, your body can
a dehydration aspect too.
Absolutely. But again, beer has been part of our journey for a long time. But drinking to excess, we've made it so easy to access beer year round. There's, and then with those higher alcohol content, we like to mix our stuff. But if you just drink beer, usually you're full and unable to consume more before you get to the point where you're really not able to function the next day, which, for me I can't have a day where I sit at home hungover. That's just that's a wasted day.
It is. Yeah, and that'll grind you after a while, especially like you said, if you're a bit of a high functioning person that you have a lot of goals, and every day you usually have a little bit of a structure.
Yeah, be productive.
Yeah, exactly.
Every day. It doesn't have to be all day. You don't have to spend. Life is a balance and a pendulum swing. Like you said, in the start of a business, it becomes all consuming. You have to put a lot of yourself, of your time into it, but I think the goal of most business owners isn't so much to own their job, but to get to a point where they can get some of their time back and that they can invest in their future in a way that they don't necessarily have to do that 14-hour, 16-hour hustle all the time.
So having said that, if knowing now the workload and everything that went into starting the company, would you have done everything the exact same way again? Not the same way, sorry. Would you have made the decision to still start, I think, the business and go through everything you went through?
That's a tough question. I don't know if I would, especially layered on the pandemic. Had that 2 years was really challenging for new business. We were on such a growth trajectory. We had 7 staff. We were growing. We were busy. It was exciting. It was even though, it was overwhelming in the beginning, as starting a business, uh, there was an excitement in that when we went from an absolutely full bar, local music, food events, to an order the next morning to shut for an indefinite amount of time and having to write that letter to my staff, laying them off. That was really challenging. And that was something that, had I known was coming down the pipe, I don't know if I would have gone down this endeavor. I also didn't know someone else was looking at a craft brewery, and it would have been nice to be by ourselves for a little while. Although we love the other brewery, you are splitting your market in two to a certain extent with how many taps are available at the different restaurants. And they had big partners. They had big money. They went brand new, with a Cadillac of a system, and so it made things different than I think I'd envisioned it. But the growth that I've done, the fact that we are at an abundant place again, I'm super grateful. But I don't know if I would have done it had I known all of those extra factors at this point, knowing what
Yeah.
I know.
It's interesting though with how the last couple of years really uh I think with especially starting out, it probably had an element of responsibility, especially with the fact that you bring on employees, because now you're dealing with humans. It's not just yourself and the equipment. You're dealing with, you must have felt responsible for a lot of the people that you're
They're part of
bringing
our
on as staff.
family.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the
Especially starting out, and it's just, everybody by name
yeah.
and their families.
Well, we're a small business. We only have three staff now on the back end, and one of the things the pandemic did do is it taught us where we could tighten up, and how to just make sure we could make it through. Um, it it changed the dynamic. Our hours aren't as late as they used to be. We used to have two bartenders, one an opening shift and a closing shift, and we just kind of shorted our hours and have one now, which the bartenders do like. They're not having to, split tips at the end of the night or decide, well, this table's been here half the day and now I'm leaving and you're coming on and they haven't paid yet, and those sort of challenges. But the dynamic of having a social based business through a very challenging social time, where we had very little say in anything, with the rules coming down the pipe. It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of stress that I know neither of the breweries in town anticipated, and it's been a hard balance of keeping our sanity through it.
You said you're a firefighter, and I'm assuming you're paid. You're not volunteered.
Full time, yeah, 42 hours a week without any extra
And
stuff.
has that been something that you had to use as a way to support past the initial startup with the brewery to keep
I've
it going?
Absolutely. I've been an unpaid staff member throughout this journey, of the brewery. And again, being a labor of love, I'm okay with that. It is at the point where I'm there when I want to be there, and I'm not actually there.
But
All of the
I
time.
get the labor of love. I really do. Like, I honestly get that dynamic. But then the reality end of things,
Without the fire department, I wouldn't have a
well,
brewery.
not only that, but sustainability.
Yeah.
After a while, you got to kind of start making those hard choices, and sometimes your own, I think, drive. We're talking about, the success and all of that other stuff earlier. That becomes a little bit of a factor when you're taking into consideration whether or not the best decision would be to maybe say, okay, this was a hell of a experience and I took a lot away of it from it, but we're going to close the doors, versus maybe something, that voice or whatever it is inside you that's driving, where you, by giving up, admit it's almost a form of defeat, and you got to weigh the options as to the better decision in making. Do I stick with it?
There was lots of those
That
where we
pendulum back and forth.
we're blessed in the fact that, because I did buy secondhand and installed everything ourselves and are such a small operation, we could easily sell our equipment and get all of our investment back. Still, to be honest, especially where we're at now, even through the pandemic, we could have just sold the equipment and still walked away.
Were those battles that you had to go through?
Absolutely.
Did that involve serious ones with your family, your wife?
Yeah, where we had to decide to, like, we had to change our budget. We, thanks to not being able to travel and any of those things, we were able to adjust some of our finances. But there was a time where, to make payroll, I had to take from my family's funds, which was never the intent. The intent was, let's give it this investment, and then, it'll kind of self start itself, and then we'll be able to run with it. And there was a time where you're looking at the accounts going, how on earth, we weren't able to get a break on our lease. We had all of our regular expenses as normal.
The expenses never go down with
Well, and they're up more than ever, to be honest. Our product is at least 20%, whether it's our labels, our cans, our base ingredients. I'd say 20% minimum. And then the shipping, being as rural as we are, has been the hardest to swallow. And I'm just not willing to pass that on to our loyal customers. We have a lot of customers that are in the brewery multiple times a week. We have a lot of people that supported us through the pandemic, and so our margins were already pretty tight. And we did do one small price increase. Looking at our numbers, we should do another one. And at this point, I'm just not willing to pass that on to everyone else who essentially has got us to this point. It doesn't seem fair to them.
Are you concerned though, but if you did, it would be a little bit too soon, and that might put stressors on the business before it's established enough to be able to absorb maybe some of the lack of, people wanting to come and spend that little extra money, because we're all,
we could make it up on the can side. We've really not tapped the potential that the canning has. But those were never, we wanted to create a space. We wanted to have a space where people can come get some sunshine in our cold winters. We have those beautiful glass bay doors, and it's bright. We have so much sun here. Even when it's cold, you can come, and even if you just come have a coffee with your kids and play some board games that are there, that's what we wanted. We have aspects to make up for the loss of funding through pushing our cans into the liquor store, pushing our cans into other neighboring communities, and we haven't come close to exhausting the expansion potential within our region, but that was never the initial goal. The goal was the locals, was, to start, it was really Fort St. John, and those are the customers that would be penalized most with the cost increases. When you buy a craft beer at a restaurant or at a grocery store, or sorry, at a liquor store, they're paying so much less for that. We're trying to compete with commercial beer, unfortunately. And so they're not the ones, if you up at 20%, you might just lose them as a customer. If I up at $1 per beer to my real loyal customers, they're the people that I would hate to lose. And they're already struggling enough with their expenses. Everything's so expensive up here.
You mentioned though that if you were to sell your equipment, it would be break even.
Yes.
And through the last couple, 2-3 years, or even maybe even a profit. And yet the viability of the business now is at a point where you're having to still invest in one form or another and juggle the firefighting, the family, and the business. So those discussions to stick through with keeping the business itself, when you still had the option of being able to, kind of focus on maybe longevity and survival through uncertain times with just the firefighting, was the local community, and I guess the dream of being able to, you must have had like a picture in your head with the brewery, with the glass and everything you talked about with, that was, I think, the end game, the goal that kept you going the whole time, with trying to weigh the pros and the cons. And
absolutely. That's, that principle that you brought up earlier of begin with the end in mind. The right now isn't what the dream was. It isn't the total vision, but the willingness to push through those hard times to hopefully get to that point is what keeps us driving. We're this far in at this stage. We made it through the pandemic. I have such amazing team, such an amazing team that to close it almost feels disrespectful to them, to the community, to my family, to have taken so much time and effort. Yet at the same time, if that's the point we got to in the future, I think it's also okay to turn that page and to take the lessons that you make from that, and apply it to the next adventure.
The fact that you did that, I think, is good for people to know, because it takes away that dynamic where some people have the impression that it's easier for you, or maybe when there's real success, it must be nice. And I think the one rare character aspect that people have that I'm starting to become a little more aware of is that there are some people that are very, I think, short-sighted, and I say that the best way it possibly can. But then there's other people that I think are so giving of themselves that envision of wanting to be a part of the community almost seems fake and unheard of. And yet the reality of what you had just explained is proof in the pudding, that you had the options to be able to back out, and yet the risk and versus reward was purely, I think, the need and the want of wanting to be able to be a part and provide something the community needed. And that in itself is a little more powerful than what I think a lot of people realize, because that's a form of, I don't know what the wording is, but of giving coming from a pure place that is rare. Not many people, I think you need to, if you're getting into business, you're drawing from a lot of characteristics, traits that you obviously got from jujitsu, and clearly your dad, I think, also, even though we didn't touch on him, but it seemed like he
mom
had
as
it.
well.
And
Mom worked at the CDC, gave like so much of herself to this community, and definitely raised us with that. You're part of a community.
yeah,
It isn't just what's best for you. It's we're if you can make a difference in someone else's journey, to be honest, that's more fulfilling than any abundance. Money doesn't create happiness. Location doesn't create happiness. Your mindset creates your happiness. Your purpose, your willingness to
your
go out there and
fingerprint.
live your life.
I think people look at it as leaving. I think there's a legacy, and people don't know how to be able to leave themselves behind, but it's fingerprints. So a fingerprint could be, the fact that you have a business within town. If you're in your home life, it could be, you built a furniture, that's where the heirlooms come from, and there's something you left behind. You left a fingerprint in someone's life. You were an impact on somebody, and that, I think, is the accomplishment. And I think what drives people, the peace of mind, knowing that when they leave and they go, they left their fingerprints behind.
We all have a drive to matter. We exactly
Yeah,
our
exactly. The
lifespan,
matter.
it's so short. And I think the older I get, the more almost desperate I feel to leave those fingerprints, because I've noticed as I'm getting older that time just goes so fast. And you hear it when you're young, appreciate it when you're young. You're not going to believe how quick it goes, but every year goes faster. You're having kids, when, for any of you new parents out there, in the beginning, it's exhausting. You question your sanity, you question your ability to succeed at it.
Yeah.
It's hard on your finances, on your relationships, on your own sense of sanity. And yet it's so worth it. And you find as you get into it that now all of a sudden I've got teenagers, and now I'm just desperate to hold on to them for as long as I can, because a few short years and I'm going to have so much time to give that brewery, I won't even know what to do with it.
When you're raising kids, or if you're going through business and you're pushed up against, I think, those really hard times, do those times actually reveal a little bit about who you are? Do you learn who you are and really how you would react? Everyone says they're going to do a thing or they're going to react a certain way, but when they're actually pushed it and they're tested against situations, kids are a very good example of that because you learn a lot more about who yourself is, the patience, your ability to be able to manage all of those nuances that it takes to raising a human being and making sure that they're given the skill or the tools to be able to be successful, in their adulthood.
Absolutely. When you have kids, they don't hand you a manual as,
No.
here's the best way to raise a well-rounded human being. You have to figure it out as you go. You have to mess up sometimes. You have to be honest with your kids that, hey, I'm just an imperfect human being on an imperfect journey as well. And it's okay if sometimes you also are experiencing that, of giving them that willingness to try. To be honest, that fingerprint thing and that aspect is part of why I started the brewery. One, I called it Beards Brewing because I'm the only son of an only son of an only son, and I felt a lot of pressure subconsciously to have a boy, even though it's so out of your control, just so that the name didn't die with me.
Yeah.
That my line just ends. And I didn't necessarily want that pressure on my own son. I wanted him to have whatever his journey is going to end up being. And I thought, hey, if I start something that maybe would go on after us, that's a way for the name to go on. As far as the starting the business itself, I want my kids to be willing to try something that might fail. That willingness to take a risk, to step outside your comfort zone, is, in my opinion, the juice of life comes right at the edge of your comfort zone. You feel most alive when there is that chance of failure, when there's that chance of falling down the cliff and not making it. That's when I feel most alive, whether you're risking money, whether you're risking, your actual life, whether you're, those challenges is where I've found I feel I get the most out of my journey, and I crave that. Firefighting is very similar. We have so much that we have to do just in our day to day, but what we all crave, as crazy as it sounds, is the craziness, because that's when we feel like we're making the most difference and where we feel the most alive.
Well, you're right, and pushing the boundaries. If it's almost debilitating if you're not given that, you got to push, you got to fight, you got to struggle. You need to learn the skill. You talked about the line and pushing the boundaries, and that takes balance. And that's the skill and the ability to be able to push those boundaries. Because if you don't, then that circle, I think comfort zone's like an elastic band, where if you don't push the boundaries, it slowly gets smaller and smaller. And next thing you know, God knows how small that gets, right? Is it your bedroom in your house? Right. Some people,
we go to those patients,
introvert, extrovert, introverts need to get challenged in that way too, to be able to maintain sanity. You got to push those boundaries, and it gets in that whole, mental health aspect, and a very complicated thing. But when it comes to passing it on to your kids, that's so there's a balancing act. You want them to have and succeed, in
so
ways
badly.
but then at the same time, how do you make it so that you're teaching them the skill and
learn to fail,
but you got to push them, and you got to put them in situations where you let them flounder.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's a lot easier said than done, right? I mean,
absolutely. That win or learn aspect is something we've always pushed. So my daughter and wife are very involved in dance, which was actually a part of my journey as well. My wife has taught ever since we moved up here. Her specialty is tap, but being a teacher, you're teaching kids a skill that they don't have, and so the only way to learn it is by repetition and that willingness to fail. And I find any of our teachers, and so often our teachers go unappreciated. They're not just teaching the subject, or my wife's case, dance itself. They're teaching them life skills. They're teaching them that, if you want to have success, you have to go through that grind. You've got to show up. We don't love the competitive aspect of dance simply because it isn't art and it's being judged on, one person's opinion the one time they see it. But at the same time, for the kids to be put up, it is something where there are no participation medals, or at least most of the competitions aren't. I think it builds character. learning how to fail, learning how to lose graciously, and continually put in that effort, even after a year that maybe has been hard.
Yeah. Well, team sports is, I think, got a lot of lessons. Jiu-jitsu, has got a lot of lessons when it comes to building some of those character traits of being able to push through certain things where, the boundaries of where you might have quit in the past, or areas that you're pushing through, and you're learning how to control that because now you know more about yourself, where that pain threshold is, the humbleness and maybe not tapping out and getting hurt, and having the ability to tap out, and suck up that pride a little bit.
Even just being uncomfortable. That's something that I think I learned initially from a firefighter. The human body is capable of withstanding a lot of pain. It's a downside of the career choice that I took, is you see people at their worst. You see people have to endure unimaginable pain for most of us, essentially. And what I learned in that is, most of what we consider pain is just being uncomfortable. Jiu-jitsu expanded on that, is we say comfort is the ability to breathe. So as long as you can breathe, the rest of it.
Comfort is the ability to breathe.
Yeah. So
everything, that puts it into perspective.
It's just that ability to take those cold, working in the patch. I learned some of that. When you're rigging in, rigging out, and doing a job, they don't care how cold it is. They're ready down hole. And so you get out there and you endure that suffering, because that's the job. That's kind of what you signed up for. So many of us up here have had to work in ridiculous weather, and that's just, it's part of enduring that suffering, and that willingness to take that voice that says it's too cold, it's too hard, it hurts too much. That's the voice that I think often prevents us from succeeding. It gets in the way of whatever your journey is, or your view of success. We all have those doubts. We all have those fears. We all sometimes succumb to them. And if you make that a habit, if you make it, things get hard, so I quit, it's hard to really fulfill a dream-filled journey if that's your mentality. And if I can impart anything onto my kids, it's that of that willingness to fail and brush yourself off and keep going. Whether you're injured, whether your dream has, your business maybe has failed, your relationship has ended, whatever it is that is creating that struggle, not to give up, and to be willing to dust yourself off and try again.
Yeah, the drive. Different question, a little off topic.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you had a beer?
I don't know if I do.
Your first glass, your first can, or
well, it probably would have been a sip at my grandparents had a place at Pigeon Lake outside of Edmonton that we go to every year. And all of my uncles, my mom came from a big Catholic family, and there was like lots of big, loud, garrulous people that talk twice as much as I do. And for those that know me, that's a lot of talking. And I do remember on one of the decks overlooking the lake, of going and like sipping my uncle or my grandpa's beer when I was, way too young to probably be doing that.
Did you like it? The taste of it?
Not in the beginning.
No,
I don't think anybody.
Isn't that weird? Like that's why I asked, because I like beer.
Yeah.
But I remember my first time having a beer, and it wasn't good. I used to smoke when I was younger, and I quit, many years ago. But my first smoke, I didn't like it. My first whiskey, I didn't like it. There's a lot of things that I do now that I cherish.
Yeah.
That the first time I tried, I hate it. I don't even think people who have their first wine, these wine connoisseurs, I'd like this. I'm not sure they even like their first wine.
We have so many customers come in, and I don't like beer. And it's like, well, have you ever tried craft beer? Well, no, but I don't like beer. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's going to be the case. But to be honest, that willingness to try, we have had some of our most loyal regulars were not beer drinkers because they never tried anything other than the commercial beers. We have a beer that tastes like coffee and chocolate and has a slightly sweet finish. We have beers that have a nice dark honey fulfilling taste. Our IPAs are filled with fruit flavors, and they smell like oranges and pineapples and pears. And the amount of variety that you can bring to craft beer for most beer drinkers would blow their mind. And again, it's not for everybody. I'm not saying that everybody out there is going to try a craft beer and be like, this is the one, but it's why we love our flights of coming. You can get a taste of all of our beers and then decide, maybe it's still not for me. But to be honest, we've found 9 times out of 10, people are like, wow, I don't like most of those, but that one,
that's because that you're making it a little bit more attractive with the variety and the flavors. But what I find interesting is that, for a lot of years, we didn't have that. Yeah. And yet it's something that everybody struggles with. I mean, you can get even into addictions, but I don't think I've ever met any single person that had a cigarette and went, oh, this is the best ever. I love it. This
is what I want to do.
And this scotch, I'm just gonna take this whole bottle.
Yeah.
So how did you go from where I think it's something that virtually every single person tries, whether it's a smokes, a whiskey, a beer, or whatever, to something where now it's become such a deep-rooted cultural and historic, thing where is weird, where if you try it, it's gross, but it turns into such a comfort item that it's civilians and cultures have kind of evolved in around it. Isn't that kind of interesting, weird? Like, that's why I asked you, do you like beer? Did you like it the first time? And
I think my personal journey, it really grew through the 7 years working on the cruise ships and traveling to so many different countries.
You're on cruise ships too?
Yeah, that was part of my journey. And just going, every country has their own beer. Many communities have their own beer. And that was where I think my own understanding of what we're sold in North America as being beer. Lagers are the shortest part of our beer journey, because to lager a beer, you have to have cold temperatures and sustained cold temperatures for the yeast to be able to stay alive and do its thing. So lagers weren't really part of the human journey until refrigeration came around, other than the occasional winter beer in colder climates. So the commercial breweries like lagers, because that cold temperature drops a lot of the nutrients out naturally. We do cold crash beers, which take a lot of the soluble fiber and some of those sort of things and take it out, because most people do want a clear beer. We do have some beers that are hazy, and that turns some people off just visually, even though the flavors you can get in the hazy beer are often even more intense than some of the other ones. But yeah, that travel aspect and going to different countries that have beer as part of their journey. I actually just took the family on a cruise and going to Jamaica and having Red Stripe. Again, they don't really export it outside of the Caribbean, but each country has, typically a beer that's theirs, that they don't export it, that isn't owned by the commercial breweries, and that's what the locals drink. Everywhere, pretty much.
Okay, I got some stuff here. We could definitely pause. This would be a wicked transition. Why don't we pause? And then when we come back, I've got a couple of little things to know about beer, and then we can actually get into, the craft of it.
Yeah, sounds great.
So deadly. Let's do it. Okay, see you in a bit.
Oh, hit the washroom real quick. So far, so good. I need to wash my legs too.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back.
Nice.
We are back. Oops, no. Uh-oh.
Maybe not.
No, we're good. We're good. Okay.
I wouldn't blame you if we had to come back and do her all over. No, again, we're not doing. Would be all right.
Oh, we are back, and we got a couple of your brews here. So I've got an amber ale.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this one here.
Amber. So you're going to have, it's one of our seasonals. You should have kind of some spice, cinnamon-ish after flavors. It is an ale. Most of our beers are ales, simply because ales are easier to make. They take half the time. We only have 3 fermenters and 1 bright tank. So we always have 4 beers going at any one time, but your ales are going to be done in, 3-ish weeks, your lagers are at least twice that. Although lagers are easier to drink, they're often lighter in flavor. We add honey to quite a few of our beers, which changes the dynamic. But yeah, we love our recipe building. That's still an aspect that I think for me gets to be a little bit of my artistic outlet. Searching for that. All the recipes are mine.
Oh, really?
It's terrifying. Those first 4 recipes that you mentioned when we first started, you essentially fill your fermenters with a big investment, having no idea what the end result is going to be. And then you just wait. Oof. And we have 15, I guess almost now 16 recipes. We have a new super light kind of summer lager, although we're taking it out in the winter, that we're trying a gluten removed beer. So that's a new thing. It's been a request for quite a long time.
Gluten-free beer.
Well, it's not quite gluten-free. We just have a new product that drops the gluten out of it. We have a couple people that are going to test it that are a bit more gluten sensitive and are willing. It's not on the website. To be honest, I could really do some updating on that. That's one of those things that you create and then you step back from. We could update some of the can photos for sure. But yeah, we've redone a bunch of our labels.
For the listener that can't hear us, we're just on the beardsbrewing.ca. That's your website.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you see in the background of that picture are the stainless steel fermenters. So essentially in a brew day, you fill those up with, we get about 14, 15, 60 liter kegs out of it. That's the big kegs. And you have to wait anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, or even more sometimes to get the beer out, depending on the beer. And you never know how it's going to turn out. We also find that seasonally, we have some difference. Part of why the one you're about to try is a seasonal beer is we like the flavor of it better when we make it around this time of year, because we have these overhead heaters that were not really designed for a brewery. They were designed for a truck shop, which is...
Oh, they're radiant heaters then.
Yeah, they're radiant heaters, and heat, temperature plays a big factor on how your beer flavor turns out. So depending when you make your beer, it's one of the crazy things about craft is it'll never be the exact same. Do
you use those heaters on purpose then?
No, we just use that so we're not in a cold space.
But it affects the way your beer ferments.
Absolutely. So those big stainless steel, it's jacketed with, there's a food grade coolant that's in it. Not that you'd ever have a leak, but you have to buy food grade just in case you had some. Yeah. All the liability aspects. But essentially you're trying to keep it at a set temperature. But when you have a radiant heater, a portion of the beer is going to get warmed slightly different.
Radiant heater is amazing, but it'll cook one side and the other side would be cold.
Yeah. So we're always struggling a little bit with that. And at first we couldn't figure out why some of our exact same recipes came out so drastically different in flavors. And the spicy flavor that you get out of the amber often is that temperature adjustment. That took some time to learn because I didn't go to school. This is absolutely a labor of love, of just trial and error and
dialing in the craft.
Yeah, trying to dial it in. So you never really know when you start a new recipe what its end result is going to be. You have, like, I always try to put a picture in my mind of what I want it to be, and what I want it to taste like, what I want that color to be. But you just don't know until.
Have you had many batches just go south? You're like, son of a man, I can't serve this.
I've never had one that I couldn't serve. I've had some that aren't my favorite.
Discounts, maybe beer night.
Well,
toonie pints.
That's the crazy thing about craft beer. You know, what we even used to consider a soured beer that we'd throw out. Now sours have become really popular again, especially kettle sour, which is just a wild yeast being introduced that creates those kind of sour yogurty type flavors. But we've never, ever had a beer that we've had to get rid of.
Man, are you lucky?
There's always customers. Sure. Some don't move as quick, like our Bee Sting lager. Which is probably our most popular beer. As soon as it's ready to go, we have to brew it again because we go through so much of it in comparison to others, but we're starting to have two of our IPAs are like that now. The black, if I don't have the black on, which is our milk chocolate oatmeal stout, I have some customers that won't come.
Is that the one I just had? I thought
no, that's an amber. The black is
that one there.
yes, yeah.
I'm switching it out
Yeah,
real quick.
you
Hold
do
on.
it. So the milk chocolate oatmeal stout, there's actually some oats in there. It's not just barley. That's why it's considered an oatmeal. It's a milk because there's some lactose sugar that gets added to it. And what I find most remarkable about the stouts is it still is mostly pale barley. It's just a small percentage of the barley that gets roasted like a coffee bean. And so they roast it. They add some cocoa to the malting process, and that's what gives it that chocolatey flavor.
What's yours there?
I have the Fireside IPA, which is one of my personal favorites. Much more fruity. The IPAs aren't for everyone. They're going to be more bitter. There's a lot more early hops added. We dry hop our IPAs, which means you add a whole bunch of hops to the fermenter, and it basically sits in it as it's fermenting, which gives a lot of the scent flavors. If you ever want to try an IPA and you haven't before, I'd always suggest give it a nice smell before you drink it, because a lot of the flavor comes out of the scent. And those fruit flavors, we're not adding fruit for the most part, although we have had a mango and a radler and some other additions, but it's actually the hops. And
so should I smell this when I crack it?
The stout isn't going to have quite as much smell.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
This is the best part of podcasting. You know, I love this.
Yeah, that you could just enjoy it. And yeah, I should have brought I was going to bring an Irish whiskey that I really like, but
that's not as strong as I was expecting.
Yeah, a lot of people
That's
anticipate it's
nice.
going to be like a Guinness type kick. Because Fort St. John had never had a craft brewery when we started out, all of our recipes were really geared towards more of the entry level craft beer drinker. We didn't want anything that was too bitter or anything that was too strong. We were trying to ease our community into craft beer.
Yeah. That's a good idea, because I think craft beer is associated with a bit of a stronger, almost bitter kind of taste, isn't it?
Often. And again, some of that is just the way that our commercial beers have been marketed. And a lot of that comes from people who have never tried it or have only tried like a really bitter IPA. And on the hop side, to be honest, hops and yeast are my two favorite ingredients. Barley makes up by far the majority of the ingredients. Almost everything is barley, although we do have some oats and a little bit of wheat in some of our beers. Barley on all the recipes is the lion's share. It's the hops that really change the character, and the yeast. And hops in this country in particular have exploded thanks to commercial brewing trying to purchase all of the hop farms in an attempt to choke
out the craft beer brewers.
Market. So we get all
dirty,
of our,
isn't it?
It is. And you know what? I'm lucky because I kind of got into it a little late. If you look at Seattle and Washington and some of the craft brewery hubs that, even Lower Mainland, you see a lot more breweries. They had to struggle through that transition where they were getting their hops from these large commercial productions, and then all of a sudden overnight they couldn't purchase their ingredients anymore.
Overnight.
Yeah, where InBev, the big corporations came in and purchased the biggest hop farms. Some of the blends of hops are proprietary, so you can.
They have a lot to lose. What did we say? $623 billion annually.
They have a lot to lose, and even us taking a couple percent of customers, because when I first got into it, the stats were 92% of beer drinkers still drank commercial beer. So we had an 8% market share. I believe we're closer to 20% market share now.
Really?
And that's simply because more people are willing to step outside of their comfort zone and realize that if you've had one craft beer that you didn't like, that doesn't mean you don't like craft beer. It might just be you don't like that type of craft beer. I'm not a huge Pilsner fan, yet we have two Pilsners, and we have customers that absolutely love them. And it's just a different flavor profile, just like you may like certain foods
Oh,
that
absolutely.
other people
That's
don't like.
a huge range. That's the nice thing about beer is it has a huge range. It's like wine.
Absolutely.
You
Even
got dry
more.
wine, you got sweet wine, and you got white, and you got red, and you've got the what do they call the freezing stuff where they freeze the berry ice
Yeah.
wine, and so same with
The
beer. It's
sweetness
a
and
tremendous amount. Well, you can have however many thousands of years of beer being around without having a whole pile of different nuances and stuff. Actually, surprisingly enough, okay, let's get into this because there was only two kinds. I wanted to hit some stuff here that I thought was kind of interesting. I'll give the listener a little bit of an idea on how to break down an understanding about beer because I learned a lot.
yeah,
Man, let me tell you, I
just
learned a lot.
prepping.
Yeah, prepping with I should have done this a long time ago. But there are two characteristics.
Characteristics.
Sometimes I shouldn't be a
That's all
podcaster,
right.
right? Characteristics that are used to describe styles of beer, and they are alcohol by volume or ABV, and international bitterness unit, which is IBU.
Yes.
So ABV stands for alcohol by volume and represents the percentage of alcohol in beer. The amount of the amount of alcohol in the brew can actually affect the taste of the beer. Beers with a higher ABV have more of a bitter flavor. In very strong beers, the alcohol can numb the tongue and neutralize the taste. So additional flavors are added to compensate for that. Brewers use ABV to achieve the perfect balance between sweetness and bitterness. Then you have the IBU, which stands for International Bitterness Unit, and is a measurement of the number of bitter flavor compounds in a beer. IBU scale starts at 0 and it has no upper limit, but most beers fall between 5 IBUs and 120. Anything under 120 can't be detected by the average palate. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpackage there. So the bitterness aspect. So a stout is going to be very low on the IBU. So it probably says on the can, but I think on the front of it, it's like a 27 ish IBU. It's not.
Do all beers have that on here
Uh,
on their labels?
no, not everybody
But
posts
yours
them,
does?
but yeah, we try to let
Oh,
people know. Um,
I don't know what this one is. Oh, here,
it should
wait a
be
minute.
right under the alcohol content.
ACL, so alcohol by, oh, 22 IBU.
There you go. So pretty low. It's not going to be very bitter. That allows for more of that sweetness to come out. Often, like we try to get a little bit of a sweet finish to it. Whereas this in IPA, it's still a pretty mild IPA. We're only at 64, so of IBU.
IBU.
Um,
So you're three times more than what this one is.
yes, and again,
Oh.
that's to cover that. So the alcohol is also higher. You're sitting at a 4.8, 4.9, if memory
This one's
serves.
4.8.
There
Yeah.
you go. And where this is a 6.2 on the alcohol.
Oh,
So, like that article was saying, if you want that higher alcohol, um, and to get out some of those hoppy flavors, you have to increase the bitterness to cover some of that. Otherwise, you taste the alcohol, which
that's not good in beer.
no, you
Like
don't really want
I
that.
don't typically like beer that has anything higher than I kind of start kind of getting squeamish at
Yeah.
5.5%. 6 and 7%, I'm not a very big fan of as far as alcohol and beer
And that's where a
percentage.
lot of those bitterness is going to come. Now, bitterness is an easy one to adjust. It's your early addition hops. So essentially, you have a big pot of warm water, you add the grain, you stir it. You're trying to pull out as many of the sugars as possible, essentially. And the sugar content is where you get your alcohol. When you add the yeast consumes the sugar. The byproduct is CO2 gas and alcohol. That's the same for your whiskeys, your scotches. It's just fermentables essentially.
Can
You need
you
sweet.
do you have to manage though the amount of the CO2 versus sugar
CO2 isn't so much a big
or alcohol?
deal.
I
You're
meant.
just dumping that out. The alcohol, yes. And the alcohol is simply how much fermentables you have. So fermentables are for us, it's all grain. Commercial breweries have learned tricks to up the alcohol without adding necessarily the same ingredients. So one of the things that lots of commercial breweries do is they've got away from it now because they got caught, but they used to add lots of corn syrup or just sugar
to promote the yeast to be able to start fermenting and producing alcohol and CO2.
Absolutely. So it's not so much the CO2. The CO2 like is more kind of, yeah. So essentially, they now use rice and corn because it has very little flavor, but you can up the alcohol content. Otherwise, commercial beer is so watered down. It should be sitting more over 2%, but then you don't get that change of state that people are searching for, that relaxing, that or that social lubricant, because the alcohol is a big component.
So what do you mean they got caught? What about that is wrong?
I think
putting the cornstarch and whatnot in there.
Well,
it's like an accelerant, right?
Kind of, yeah. Traditionally, beer, if you look at the German history, beer had to be barley, hops, yeast, and water. Those were the 4 ingredients. That was all you were allowed. IPAs only came around because at the time we were shipping beer down through the East India Trading Company, way back when we used to sail on a sailing ship. We would have to go around the what is it, the Cape Hope, the Horn of Cape Hope there, to get on to the other side, or through the Suez Canal or whatever that was on a sailing ship. The beer was going bad. It couldn't make it that journey. Temperature negatively affects. Temperature and light are your enemies of beer, essentially. So the reason IPAs came along is they learned hops have a natural antibacterial, a natural antibiotic. Like there's aspects to the hop plant that is a preservative, essentially. And so they learned that if they added more hops, the beer would last longer. They literally, the first dry hop beers made, it's just a pale ale, like almost all beers were back in the day. And they took a big scoop of hops, added it to the barrel before they pounded it on, stuck it on the ship that took 40 some days to get wherever it was going, and the beer stayed good. The downside is it changed the flavor profile. So then, they started adjusting the beer in this whole new variety of beer. It's why they called it an India Pale Ale, is it was the East India Trading Company. Mainly it was the British that were shipping it. It's through the warm climates while they were in Egypt, while they were basically colonizing the world. Yeah. And that's where that came from. The alcohol content, though, to loop back to why the commercial breweries is they advertised initially as, we're using grain, which is what beer's meant to be, but they were artificially essentially increasing the alcohol volume with sugars. And it just doesn't make great advertising doing it that way. It's not the best way to use,
it's not staying true to the craft.
It's not staying true to the craft. It also isn't near as healthy. It's an additive that doesn't have any of the health benefits of what, typical craft beer adheres to. And I'm not saying that craft breweries have never artificially upped their alcohol too, because I must admit it's way easier to add a sugar than it is to add a ton of grain, as we do. Because to get a 6.2 or a 7 or an 8, it just means you have an extra 100 pounds of grain. You need, and that means while you're stirring it, you have that much more solids in your pot. It means you're getting out less beer in the long run. Our IPAs, we get about 10% less beer out because we're also adding in all these hops that are a solid that absorb some of the beer that we have to pull out before we serve. And it's why IPAs are often more expensive. They take more ingredients, you get less beer, and it's a much more dynamic recipe, essentially. And the hops are our most expensive ingredient by far. Your average hop for a lager is going to be maybe $5-6 a pound. Your IPA hops with all of the crazy fruit flavors in particular that I tend to lean towards, they're in the $24, $25, $30 a pound range, and you use 4 times as much of them.
So in the bio we were talking about earlier, all your ingredients are local to the Peace region, except for two of the
Not
I'm looking
necessarily the Peace region,
or
BC.
BC, sorry,
Yeah, I
except
wish
for
they were
two
all
of
the.
the malts,
Yeah, so those
correct?
are some specialty malts that we get from England that just one of them is actually in there. It's a caramel, which allows some of the caramel flavors, and it's
Mm.
something that we don't
Every
do
time you
here.
mention my beer, I have this urge to take a sip.
Well, and one of the things that I'm hoping will be a spin-off down the road is maybe we'll get a local malter, an entrepreneur that wants to get into that because there's quite a bit of
You never know.
equipment.
They're into coffee now.
Well, that's
Like, what
yeah,
is it? Hell's Half Acre
yeah,
Coffee. Shout out to those
absolutely.
guys. I don't get anything for it. It's just local.
Yeah, no, we
Did you know that we actually have coffee? Hell's
they
Half Acre,
they're actually roasting it in behind the brewery.
your brewery.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so
Oh shit!
it's all done on the same property essentially right now.
Well, there you go.
So yeah, I'm very aware of that,
Yeah,
and
I would.
we've done some canning for them. We'd love to do a collaborative brew where it's a coffee beer
Ooh,
and
that would be
to mix in
tasty.
some of
Yeah,
those sort of things.
I. That's something I would like. I'd
Yeah,
definitely try that out.
but our region grows a ton of malt grade barley. Phillips Brewery, Phillips Brewing and Malting, which I believe is on the island. When I first started my research for what's available in our region, I found out that the Dawson grain terminal trains out hundreds of cars of trains to Phillips Malting and Brewery from our region. So farmers already are tapping in to the brewery market. And they're one of the few breweries in the province that essentially is malting their own grain, which
Have
is
you been
a
in
whole other.
competition with the big boys though? Because we're up here. Have you had to actually compete like what you're talking about earlier, where now maybe some of the ingredients are being gobbled up by the bigger players?
Not really. If anything, I think the unintended spin-off of it is we now support the small craft hop grower, the farmer that got tired of working for the man and decided to plant some hops in his property. We're buying our hops for the most part from BC growers that just have a couple acres in their backyard
Oh,
that have decided to grow. And it takes at least 3 years for hops to establish. There's certain hops that are proprietary blends where you can only buy them from one farm or from one person. But thanks to commercial breweries who really the commercial brewery doesn't want a big variety of hops. They want like
they want to
they
standardize it.
want one
Yeah,
hop. They want
they want
that
the McDonald's. They want the
exactly.
flavor to be the same
Budweiser
no matter
wants
where you
their
go.
beer to taste exactly like
Yeah,
Budweiser, whether you buy it here, whether you buy it
exactly.
in Japan or Europe or the States. They want that consistency. Where one of the cool things is through this process, a lot of farmers have realized that my soil gives a different flavor, or my water content, or we had these two sets of hops and we blended them, and now we have this new flavor that is available. And to be honest, the hop revolution has exploded where every year I get this whole list of hops that don't even have names yet. It's just experiment number this, or
Mm.
transitional number this. And it's just farmers trying new things exactly as the craft brewers are.
Maybe I should try getting into it.
Well, you
Hey,
wouldn't be the only one. We have,
grow a few acres,
yeah, well,
20, 30 acres of this stuff
oh,
would
you would
probably,
not need 20, 30 acres.
no.
Because they grow vertical, most of our hop farms, you can grow a lot of hops on a very small area of land because they grow vertical. You don't need a mass sprawl. It's actually, they're really good. They create shade. They're good for the soil. They grow to 20, 30 feet per year. They're
Oh,
beautiful.
wow.
But they are a little temperamental when you first start them out, and you have to figure out certain ones that we've tried to grow haven't always survived our winter, getting them to the point where they can make it through this bitter
You got to
cold.
get them to hardy up, I guess.
Start early is the biggest thing. You can buy hop rhizomes from the lower mainland and have them come as soon as the thaw happens, and essentially the earlier you can get them in and established, the better. That's the ones I've seen
Yeah,
the
our
most
growing season is
success.
very short. My wife has got a nice garden, and we've a few years jumped the gun because we get these nice warm. Well, April can be hot, and then
Yes.
all of a sudden we still get smashed with like some pretty cold frost mornings, and then everything up to that point was for nothing. So it's you got to fight the urge on getting everything seeded a bit too early.
Yeah. Once they're established, though, it's a pretty hardy crop, and they'll, to be honest, lots of people in our area find them a nuisance plant where they're trying to beat them back, where
Mm.
they're
Oh, good. That's
overtaking.
good. So they're easy to get established and kind
Once
of
they're
tweak a little
established,
bit.
yeah, then they like to go. And then as far as yeah, the ingredient goes, you add, all beer has hops. Anyone who's like, oh, I don't like hops, then you're not drinking beer. Essentially, you said that bitterness can go as low as I think it was like 5 IBU or something like that. If you don't put in hops, there's no IBU, and all you have is a sweet um, alcohol drink that doesn't taste anything
I
like
guess like
beer.
a Corona, very light.
Still has, to be honest, what makes that light is going to be more the fact that you have some rice and corn in there. And the yeast is going to be super light, but it still will have a hop. It'll just have a much more mild hop.
Mm.
So you have to put hops in your initial boil. So I kind of digress. You have that big pot of grain. You sparge, you spray out water as you transfer it into your boiling kettle, and then right when it starts to boil, that's when you add your initial hops, and that's what gives you that bitterness. Depending on how many alpha acids and basically the natural components that's in that hop will adjust the bitterness, which is, it varies drastically based on the type of hop. But again, all beer has that initial boil addition. Otherwise, it's not beer.
Is that automated, or are you testing it constantly and then before it goes to a boil, you're adding the ingredients?
It's more just a recipe. Beer,
What
it's
does a recipe mean? A recipe as an ingredients, or a recipe as a certain amount of ingredients at specific times that you want to add?
it's kind of both, to be honest. It's you have your initial recipe is going to be what's called your grain bill. It's you take the barley, the malted barley, and you run it through a mill. Not trying to turn it into flour. You just want to crack that barley open so that when the water hits it, you're able to pull out as much of the sugars and the starches as possible. So you mill it. And that initial recipe is, again, most of our recipes are mostly barley. And then it's that 10%, maybe even 2% of ingredient shift with your chocolate malts, your Pilsner malts, your wheats, your oats, your caramels, your like, it's the blessing of being a small brewery. We have so many different ingredients because we don't need the storage space that a larger brewery would need to have so many different ingredients. And same as hops. You then now have your grain bill, which is the exact same. It's weight, essentially. You mill it onto a scale, and you know exactly what your weight is. You know exactly your volume of water.
Do you do that at the brewery?
We do all that at the brewery. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
right in the back there. And
You must have
then,
an overhead crane
oh
for a,
no,
no?
it's a physical endeavor for sure. Where it's bags, 25 kg bags. I actually feel like I'm back at Sangel
Oh, they're
cutting
actually not, they're
concrete.
not great big grain bags. They're smaller bags that you can pack by hand.
Yeah, so 55
Oh,
pound
okay.
bags essentially, so that you can, sometimes you have to like cut them into a smaller pail to be able to lift. Bigger breweries do have like air push systems. I looked into. There's a bunch of great technology that's out there. It just wasn't within our side business budget at the time. But yeah, we were essentially milling into these big buckets and then hand pouring it into the water, stirring it, and then when it starts to boil again, it's weight of hops at certain times of the boil. So your early addition boil hops are going to give the bitterness and adjust that initial bitter, but because it has to go through 90 minutes of boil, that initial hop doesn't impact very much flavor.
Mm.
So that's why something like a Corona or a Bud is mostly going to have early addition hops, which just gives it that bitterness to balance out the alcohol volume. The crazy flavors that come from your hops are all late addition hops. So either at the very end of your boil or as you're whirlpooling it, you spin it
How
right
are you spinning
before
that?
just liquid. So
Like they've got something in there that like an agitator?
no, it's a basically within that big kettle is a welded angled connection that we put onto a pump, and we put that boiling hot liquid in
And the
to
pump
a venturi.
circulates it.
Yeah, the pump pushes it and it gets the whole thing spinning. And then that's as we put it into the chiller, we try to bring it down to 18, 20 degrees through the chiller before it goes into the fermenter. And that just makes it so that we're not well, it's good for the beer, and then you're not killing the yeast when you're adding it as well with that hot water.
Okay,
hot
so
wort.
just let's go through the process a little bit because I think I have bits and pieces of how you go through it. But you start out with this big vat. So there's that kettle that you called it.
Yeah.
And underneath that kettle, you have a burner.
Yes. So we've actually got 4 burners, and it's a mirror. So at home, if you were going to brew all grain at home,
yeah,
you need 2 pots. One pot, you're going to put water in. You're going to put your weight of grain. You're going to stir it. You're going to stir it for a certain amount of time at a certain temperature.
And when you're stirring it, these pumps are just taking that fluid and they're pumping it, and you're getting that venturi effect.
At this stage, no. At the initial stage, so this is in the first pot, there is a mesh stainless steel grate essentially on the bottom. And all the pump's doing there is trying to pull the liquid out the bottom and put it back on the top.
Oh, okay. And keep the solids still in the kettle.
Yeah, you end up with a grain level essentially, and all you're trying to do at the initial stage is wash as much of the sugars out of the grain as possible.
Oh,
not just the sugars, but that's the main component.
Is this a high volume thing?
Well, it depends how big a brewery you have.
Well, yours.
No, ours is like ours are running through 1/2-inch lines.
And that doesn't plug
off? Occasionally we've had issues with plugging off, but you learn there's tricks and things that you can do to mitigate that.
What's one of your tricks?
You can actually add a rice hull. That doesn't affect the flavor of the beer at all, but it's a natural way that the rice hull is thick enough that it makes it so you don't have a dough base. What you don't want is to have a doughy layer that of that grain that then the liquids can't get
impermeable. I see.
So you just want that.
It keeps permeability, so your fluids can filter
similar.
through it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then so you take that and you pump it over into your boil kettle, and that's where you have that venturi valve essentially.
So the first one is almost like just getting it to steep like a tea, taking on and absorbing. There's got to be probably an absorption rate of a certain percentage,
and that's
from
the
your
time and the temperature.
Okay. So and what are the ingredients again?
That's mostly all barley. Occasionally, again, yours has a little bit of oats, so flaked oats. Your Pilsner, well, our white, I guess, has a bunch of wheat added, but most of it's barley. It's all just grain and water at that stage at a certain temperature. Then when you transfer it, and that's called a mash tun, your tea, and that's a great analogy. I haven't actually heard it that way. You're steeping that water, and that's where it becomes wort, is the technical name for it.
And the mash is the byproduct still left over,
which you then have to get rid of. All of our grain goes to local farmers.
What do they use that for?
Pig feed mostly, or
fertilizer, even, I guess.
Well, mostly it's feed, because it's very high. It's basically the most nutrient of the barley. To get to the level of malt grade barley is the top grade of barley. So it has the most amount of nutrients. So they use it as feed for chickens, feeds for pigs. You can use it. You can make bread with it. I've seen dog treats made out of it.
Okay. So that's actually, the dog treat was a good one, because I know when you break it apart, that consistency, that very granular looking.
Yeah, so that's fiber, because of the milling of the grain essentially, and you're left with what's left over with a bunch of the sugars dropped out of it.
How long do you circulate this, or steep the what do you call that then again?
The mash tun?
Yeah. How long? You said temperature and time.
Yeah. Pushing my it really depends a little bit on the recipe. I'd have to pull up. It's all just written out, and we follow it the exact
You don't want to
same
give
per
us trade
recipe.
secrets?
I'm willing to help out, but
On average, like without ruining
a brew day takes 12 hours for a double
Oh,
batch.
this is a little while.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no,
And what
it's
temperature? Are we a little bit better than room? Like 30,
oh yes.
40?
Yeah, no, you're
You're below boiling. Right?
yeah, below boiling for the mash tun. And then once you go into the boil kettle, then it boils for 90 minutes.
Oh, okay. So the process picks up once you get it over.
And then while that's happening, we scoop out the grain and we do the whole thing again. So
you scoop it out. You can't, it's just not a filter you pull out of there. And
there's so much weight in there. There are like the system that we'd like to evolve to has a nice hatch door and has, you know, a built-in system that basically helps pull that out. But even the really good ones, you still have to reach in there, and it's a physical, labor-intensive job. You've got to pull all of that moist grain out, essentially.
At that point in time when you're doing it, does it are there anything you need to be aware of as far as gases that might kind of break out of something like that?
No, that's the interesting thing about the beer. Health Canada they care more about our pizza warmer than they do about the beer.
Oh,
it's a strange thing. The beer itself, and I think that's part of why it's been with us for so long of our journey. In the Middle Ages, it was healthier to drink beer than water. Kids had, watered down ale. That was very, very common, mainly because one, the natural antibacterial aspects of the hops make it so that beer is going to last. Two, nothing can survive a 90-minute boil. So when you vigorously boil a liquid for that long and then you flash cool it, essentially you have a product that nothing will have survived. So if you had any, water's a great example. Through the Middle Ages, the water, because we didn't understand our sewage aspects so much, water wasn't very healthy to drink. You got sick from drinking water.
Oh, so this would sanitize it.
Yeah, so that 90-minute boil, 60 minutes depending on your beer, but most of ours are 90-minute boil. Nothing can survive that.
Yeah.
So
plus you have, like with yogurts, you have fermentation, which develops a healthy bacteria culture within it. So that there's that health aspect.
Absolutely. And, we're using yeasts that have been around, we're still learning aspects about our yeast, but yeast is another one that adds a lot of flavor, adds a lot of dynamic. And it's a living, like yeast grows, it actually gets bigger. You add yeast and you end up with more yeast after
bread rising kind of thing.
Exactly. It's kind of like a starter that way. And you can reuse yeast and allow it to, to kind of age and shift for a certain amount of time. But yeah, in that boil, that's where you are adding the hops. Your early addition is your bitterness. Your late addition are the scents and that kind of.
What do you mean early and late addition? What does that refer to?
So you have hops that you'll add immediately after it starts boiling, which that's what gives you the IBU that you were referencing.
Oh, okay.
If you only added hops at like 90 minutes, and then you immediately send it out, you're not going to get very much bitterness out of that. It needs some time to be in that boil. The late addition hops is where you're getting, some people really like the pine and the earthy scents and flavors. I've always resonated more to the fruit scents and flavors. So that's when we're doing our later addition hops. So they're not sitting in that boil so long that it's dropping out those flavors, that they're killing those scents and flavors. The
hops is what's giving it a fruity?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's Why are you blowing my mind?
That's where all of that comes from.
It's not fruits.
No fruits.
No fruits.
No, it's like this beer that I have here has all sorts of apricot, pineapple, citrus smells and tastes, and that's the hop.
Really?
Yeah. So there's literally hops called Citra. One of our favorites is Mosaic.
You're controlling it based strictly off of when you put the hops into
and how much. Yeah. So
And it's giving it fruity flavors.
yeah, so and that's where the kind of the art comes in. There's some breweries that are trying adding hops every 20 minutes. There's some breweries that are only adding at the beginning and the end. There's some breweries that are mixing it up, where we have some beers where we'll add one type of hops in the beginning to get our bitterness. I'm starting to talk with my hands.
That's good. I encourage it.
And then one hop, a different hop, a whole different variety that we add at the end to try to bring in those subtle scents and those subtle flavors.
Do you need to pull the hops that you use in the early part of the stages out of there before you put the later?
Not typically. No, you couldn't really. It stays in there.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so it ends up through there. And then for IPAs, there's another layer of hops. It's called dry hopping, and that's where after it's cool and it's in the fermenter, it's where it's going to spend its time building the alcohol content. You dry hop it, and usually it's 4 to 5 days before you pull it. You add a whole bunch of solids into your liquid tank, and that gives a whole other layer of scent and flavor.
So your time, like the brewing, is with heat, so that you're breaking down the solids so it can be absorbed into the fluid, and then you're cooling it down for the fermentation to start taking place after you've removed the hops and the malt.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when you dry hop it, you do end up with solids all over again, which is why our fermenters are conical. So they're tapered at the bottom.
Yeah.
And so when you cool it down, you can drop those solids, and you actually try to pull the solids before you filter the beer into where you carbonate it.
And that's called
dry hopping.
Dry hopping.
Yeah.
What do they call that? Dry hopping.
Again, that came from the British, where they were adding loads of dry hops into those barrels, hoping someone realized that the higher hop content beer was lasting longer. And so they took all these dry hops, because the hops are, well, that's what my logo is. Essentially, they look like a little bud on the vine. And adding those dry hops to the beer change the flavor, but gives it all the extra antibacterial and antimicrobial components that's naturally occurring through those hops.
And the malt is in the first stage.
That's the barley. That's all in the first stage.
Why keep those separate?
It's just how beer works. So
you can't just use that ingredient, like have one kettle and one process.
There are one kettle systems. It's just much easier because you have all of the solids in your mash tun. You have that grate, so we basically pull out through a valve below that grate, and then what's left is all of your grain
mixing
bed.
It differently. So you're pulling from the bottom, you're pumping it on top, and it's just filtering from the top down, and that's how you're mixing.
And when it transfers over to the boiling kettle, all you have is liquids.
And it's spinning.
Well, it's spinning at the end, but in the beginning, all it's doing is boiling. And then that's when you add your hops, and it just ends up being part of that liquid.
Well, that makes sense. Okay, I understand.
And part of the whirlpooling is pulling out some of those solids. So essentially, when you whirlpool it, the valve is slightly above.
The venturi of the centrifugal effect is allowing the fluid to drop, and the solids kind of stay up in your kettle.
Yeah, and they end up outside of where the valve is pulling from. It's just an easier way of pulling solids than trying to filter everything.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what do you transfer that into? You said it goes from that into another container.
That's what was on the website, that big stainless steel thing. So it goes through a plate chiller to bring it down to temperature. So one hose essentially from that valve through a pump through the plate chiller into the fermenter, and that's where it becomes beer. That's where you add the yeast. Is once it's cooled down, it's a double brew day, so essentially it's 4 of those big kettles, those big 4-foot tall pots, essentially fills up the fermenter. And then that's where you would dry hop if you were going to. For most beer, you just add the yeast, you put a top on it, and you then leave it and you let it do its thing
in that kettle,
in that fermenter.
Fermenters like a kettle? Is it stainless steel?
It's the big tall things that you see in the brewery that if you pull up the website.
Do they hold multiple batches?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you can make, I see. So what's your How much? What's the volume? How many batches can you hold?
Well, it really depends. We have one that we can do more than a double batch, but basically, so that's the fermenter right there.
I'm just gonna share this here real quick. And boom, we're sharing. So
So
just
those
bear in mind,
are,
the listener that can't see.
yeah, we're looking at a 10-foot tall stainless steel.
Oh,
That's,
you have malt. There's four in this
yeah,
picture.
exactly. So the
Oh,
bottom of those is where it's conical. You can kind of see it starts to taper onto the bottom.
yeah.
The other one is a bright tank, and that's where large breweries can serve right out of that bright tank. You can just constantly top that one up. Because we're limited for space, we will often keg, and that's where our beer lives, is in the kegs once it's all ready to go. But essentially, if you had 15 beers and 15 bright tanks, you could just constantly top it up with that beer, and let it live in there, because there's no light, there's no oxygen, they're all CO2 purged. You want to keep beer away from light and oxygen as much as possible. That's what's going to give it its longevity and
Well,
allow it to age.
how many times can you put a batch in there to allow it to ferment and before it's ready for being able to bottle and distribute?
Essentially, in that 12, 13-hour day, it fills that fermenter.
Yeah.
And then it lives in there for the 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the beer.
Oh, so this equipment's tied up for that duration of time.
Yes, that's the challenge. And that's where
Oh,
we'd love to get more fermenters. We'd love to expand and grow, because that allows you to have more. But then once it's ready and you have kegs, it's all about anticipating what you're going to be running out of, what your new beers are, and trying. That's, to be honest, my newest challenge is trying to keep up with our most popular beers and anticipate when to get that beer into the fermenter so it'll be ready when it's needed. And I'm still failing and learning a lot at that one.
do you have pumps that draw the beer when it's ready and it goes right into bottling?
Absolutely. Some of it's just gravity fed, and then we use CO2 to pressure push it. So you don't need pumps once it's in there. You can pump, but the way they're designed, again, you don't want to create a vacuum within the space. So you push in food grade CO2, which just creates a blanket that allows you
That
to
doesn't
push
have
out.
Exactly in there.
Exactly. There's
Okay.
never, it's
You
all
don't
the
want to introduce
oxygens.
atmospheric air.
Exactly.
Does that affect it when you're pouring it into a bottle, though, when you're oxygenating it a little bit?
Again, you're trying to expose it to as little oxygen as possible. So when we fill, there's only a couple seconds where the very top of it is exposed to oxygen. It bottom fills when we fill our cans. It's why growlers, although when any brewery starts, it's usually their most popular mode of selling the beer. That's the big glass reusable bottles. It's not the best for the beer because it is exposed to oxygen through that filling process. We try to purge, but you still have a little head of oxygen. And then as soon as you open that beer and pour it, you now are replacing, if it was full of CO2, you're now, that displaced liquid now has a layer of oxygen on it. And the longer it stays in your fridge, it doesn't necessarily make the beer go bad, but the CO2 that's compressed into that liquid
Is a buffer.
is coming out, and it's mixing with the oxygen. It's why you get the when you open it. It's the release of that dissolved CO2 that's ending up in there. And it's the downside of growlers. We always tell customers it's kind of like fresh bread, where once you open that bag of fresh bread, you have a limited time span where you're going to get that most fresh flavor. And that's simply because the oxygen on top is displacing the CO2, and you end up having a flat beer over time.
Yeah. So do you need to keep that at a certain temperature for what did you say, 13 weeks?
No.
How long did you say?
It really depends on the beer. Ales, you can push to 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. So that's how long this equipment is being tied up. Well, before it's
where
ready
your
to
lagers are usually a month-ish. Where it's in there.
Temperature
controlled. So each one has its own temperature control, and essentially you're trying to keep it at where the yeast is most happy, where it's going to yeast. It's why ales were most common. Ale yeast has a really wide temperature range, almost like a flammable range, where it has a happy layer. So at the low temperature of 12, 14 degrees up to 22, 23, 24. It really depends a bit on the yeast, but they're happy at multiple temperatures.
It's
Whereas
pretty cool. 14
loggers
degrees.
loggers need that cool temperature, or it goes into, when it warms up, they'll go into stasis and they won't consume any more of the sugars. So
Oh.
loggers have to be cooler to be happy.
Isn't it weird that it's cooler, not warm? You would think the warmer
Yeah,
it is, the more it would actually the bacteria culture would
yeah, just
thrive.
where it's developed from, where it's learned to thrive, and even that coolness is why it takes twice as long. It's
Yeah, I
not
see.
as
Yeah.
active. Where the warmer ale yeasts, it's hungry, it'll consume, like, you can measure the sugar content, and that's how you calculate your alcohol volume. But you can measure the sugar content as you go and watch that sugar content go down and the alcohol content go up as the yeast does its work.
So how do you maintain that temperature at a steady rate? Is that ambient room
It's a
temperature or
chiller.
you the
So
chiller
they're
is
they're jacketed, so that fermenter has a jacket on it, that essentially a temperature controlled chiller on just a open close valve. When it goes down to a certain temperature, it'll open up, or when it goes up to a certain temperature, it'll open up,
and so
just to
you
bring
have a
it.
heater and a chiller?
Where we live, we don't really need the heater. The space in the room is always at 20 degrees for the most part, so you're able to
To
warm
chill
it
it
up
from
simply by
ambient down.
closing the chiller
Oh.
valve, and then as soon as it gets too warm, it opens up.
And that's that
um,
food grade fluid or
that's running
that you're
through those
talking about.
lines. Yeah,
And it's just like glycol
glycol.
lines that
Yeah,
go.
that's all it is.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's every brewery in the world essentially runs like this. You can have, there's the occasional cellar that's temperature controlled by the cellar itself, but if you look at any brewery, this is how we're doing it. It's the best way to maintain the safety while having the control of the temperature.
Is it expensive to run? Because you're going
Uh,
from, like, let's say a batch. You're talking about these big heaters, now
yeah,
heating everything, to the chillers over, a period of time, couple, 2, 3 weeks, however long. Let's say a month
yeah.
now for some of the. That's gotta. Do you have that factored into your individual product sales?
We do, although per
Because,
beer it changes, time of year up
but do you
here
know
really
what that
changes.
is
We do,
roughly?
yeah. I
Okay.
I have to. It's the wiggle room that we're playing with. It's what's creating our margins essentially.
Is it more expensive for consumables than what most people realize? Like,
Absolutely.
those heaters must just suck up. How many billion or million
400,000
BTU?
BTU is our burners. So on our brew day, we do use a bunch of gas. The most efficient way, and the system I'd love to evolve to, is steam. Steam produces so much more heat with less initial BTU.
Yeah.
Although we also looked at an electrical system. So the Grain Bin Brewery in Grand Prairie has an electrical one. So it's basically an electrical heat probe that's boiling that liquid, but it's very inefficient to bring that much liquid to a boil. Whereas a direct flame burner is incredibly efficient at bringing that liquid to a boil. We try to be super conscious with how much we're using. Other than that brew day, though, then you don't really need any gas other than to heat the space. It's really just the ingredients and time, patience.
And that cooler, that fridge that is cooling the food grades, is it glycol or
Yeah, it'd be the same
it's a
thing the
glycol?
grocery stores use to make their refrigeration.
That's a very low
Very
energy.
low
It's like a
energy.
fridge. Yeah.
Everything's insulated.
Yeah.
We try to keep it as efficient as
So
possible.
there isn't a
There's a
huge
small
cost to that.
pump. Yeah, most of our cost is our space, is our ingredients. And our staff is our biggest expense, but to be honest, that's the most important expense.
Mm-hmm.
Our people.
What about some of the consumables, like bottles and labeling and stuff like that? Do you outsource some of that stuff?
Absolutely. Our cans, which we found, lots of people like bottles. The downside with bottles is to ship it, the weight really ups the shipping cost. Plus, your breakage is just that much more of a pain. We use cans as most craft breweries do. The nice thing with the cans is we seam them ourselves. There's always some damage getting a pallet of cans. You basically get a full pallet worth, and then are filling them and seaming them ourselves.
Do you need to worry about sanitizing them first?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's another process.
Yeah,
there
there's
with
another
the-
process. It's definitely
How
a
do you
time.
sanitize that?
Well, the cans come sanitized and all layered, but it's just a liquid one-touch sanitizer. It's the same stuff that you'll see at a restaurant that they'll sometimes spray into your glass before
Yeah.
they pour a beer.
Yeah.
Very similar. It's we try to use as little products like that as possible, just because some of them impart a flavor that I don't love within it. The best way is to keep your palate wrapped. And then, yeah, it's just a quick spray of sanitizer, a quick blow of air to make sure that everything's out of there. And then you're displacing the oxygen with CO2. So you actually put a layer of CO2 into the can before you add the beer, so that as the beer is pushing up from the bottom, it's pushing out with a head of CO2. You overfill it so that when you put the lid on, there's as little chance of uptake of oxygen as possible, and then you seam it.
And it's different filling it originally than it is when you're on top. Like, it doesn't foam. Does it foam as much where there's a bit of a head in there that takes up space?
It really depends a bit on the beer.
Is there like something you need to be conscious of as far as how
temperature is a big one? So the warmer a beer is, the more CO2 it's gonna let release. When it's cold, that CO2 will stay suspended in the liquid. So the colder you can keep it, it's why your first pour of a beer, there's usually a short loop of a beer system, especially in some of the restaurants might have a long system. That first beer is going to be the most foamy because it's warmer in that line than it is in the cooler where it's coming from. And that warmth is releasing more CO2, which gives you more foam. So your initial couple beers, like your first beer you typically pour out, it's just foam. But as it starts flowing and coming out of that cold keg, as long as you're on getting it out, usually you have very little waste.
Oh, so you want to have everything pretty much dialed in. So when it comes time to bottling, it's just boom, and it's from beginning to end with very little downtime in between.
Yeah, we're starting to actually can right out of our bright tank. So essentially it's coming straight from that 2 degrees that we chill it down to into the can.
Do you want to be careful that you don't go down into 0 or -1?
You do, because it won't wreck it. You'll end up, to be honest, most beer, you'll have more flavors if you allow it to warm up. Kind of like wine. White wine is often lighter, colder, whereas when it's warm, it has more flavors. Beer is very similar. If you drink a cold beer, it's going to be much more subtle flavors. If you let that stout warm up and give it a try, it's going to taste like a completely different beer.
That's why Guinness and like Longbow are supposed to be
warm. Yeah. To be honest, most beer would be, it wasn't until refrigeration came, even the frosted steins, customers love it. They love having, the frozen filaments of moisture that's in there and the mouthfeel that gives. But the flavors themselves are a lot more pronounced in a warmer beer.
Have you considered blending between a champagne and let's say a Strongbow?
We have some. So one of our regulars, amber side is what we call it. It's the amber that you had first and the fireside. And our bartender,
we're gonna have to try that.
Our bartender literally pours half of one and half of another, and it's how I come up with some of my recipes. Is just blending.
You're blending the light and the dark.
Yeah, trying to figure out, okay, what is it that I like out of these flavors? What would I like to get rid of? What sort of color would I like to end up with? And then trying to match that in the recipe.
Wow. So cool. I understand beer a little better.
Yeah, it's quite an art. Although,
what did we miss there?
We got pretty much all of the beer process itself.
Because I'm going to hit you with a few more questions here.
To be honest, I was only a home brewer for a year when I bought the equipment.
Oh,
So
So that learning curve was
oh,
wicked sharp.
it was, and to be honest, when I keep saying to be honest, I should stop that. Um, when
Actually, I didn't even, to be honest, I didn't even notice it.
I w- I didn't even know what I didn't know when I began.
You don't know what you don't know until you know.
Yeah, and it's such a it's a lesson of that we have to get through life, I think, to a certain extent, is that willingness to leap and then to admit that I didn't know certain aspects. You know, yeast is something that I'm still learning so much about. The temperature aspects on the beer when it's in that fermenter, I didn't know about, and just had to figure it out. Even the canning, we had a couple batches of cans that were ending up flat, where we were getting complaints from customers. And if you ever have any beer that you're not completely satisfied with, come back, we'll refund or give you a whole 6-pack, even for, you know,
you shouldn't say that.
well, you know what? I want happy customers.
They're going to be coming back drunk and happy.
We're in a small community, and you succeed or fail on the locals' opinion of your product.
No, that's true. That's true.
It's why we don't have a restaurant still.
Is it?
It is. This community is very particular when it comes to food. Not just the food, but the service, the consistency. I've seen so many small restaurants start guns blazing and not be able to succeed. And we love the new thing. Everybody flocks to the new restaurant, but those that succeed are the ones with the consistency.
I'm glad you touched on that, because I think a lot of people had the perception, whether accurate or not, the reason you stayed away from the food aspect is because that's a whole nother layer of things that you got to worry about, from the cook to the facilities to the food grade to the insurance and the licensing and the waitress. Like there's a whole nother element there.
It's another whole business.
Yeah, it's a tremendous. Whereas you're focusing, I think, a little bit more on one thing. But having said that, you do encourage and allow
if you
third party food. So
order
if you wanted
food,
to
bring in food, I would love, my honest dream at this stage is someone who's passionate about food, like I am about beer, to come in and park a food truck out front full time. I would love to find a partner that's where their passion lies, and to kind of let them run with that. I love food. I love eating it, but I'm very aware, having spoken with a lot of the local restaurant owners and, you know, other people chasing those dreams, that it's a big beast, and it's another whole beast where, you know, the prep, the anticipation of time, getting the ingredients here, the consistency, the staff. I don't want to get into it and mess it up.
Yeah, that's a smart call, I think, because as much as it seems like takeout and the food businesses, it seems like a failsafe. I'm shocked at the turnover rate that we have in this town with the restaurants that come, and they don't even last for too long. We're talking 3-4 months.
Yeah, it's such a challenging business. And, you know, in the beginning, myself included, we flock to the new place. We want to try it out. We want to give it a chance. But unfortunately, you have one bad experience. Sometimes that may be the last time you have those customers.
Yeah.
And for me, you know, I'd love a pizza oven. I'd love, you know, to have a full pub menu, but it just, at this stage of our journey, isn't something that I'm willing to sacrifice the whole business on just to chase it. We do have a lot of food trucks. Well, pre-pandemic, we had lots of food events where we use the space to let other people's businesses thrive through that. So we'd have a food event. We'd park the truck out front. It was that win-win aspect that I love. You know, lots of food trucks don't have seating. They don't have a space for their customers to enjoy the food. So they're looking for the park. They're looking for the space. We've got that. We've got the patio. We've got the space. And we loved being able to park a food truck out front and kind of let them bring in some of their own abundance and creations. And, you know, we gave our customers that aspect of fresh local food And we brought in a whole other segment of customers. That was kind of a cool little
Are there a lot of
win-win.
food trucks in Fort St. John?
There were before the pandemic.
Yeah.
They
That,
didn't survive 2 years of no customers.
yeah. No, that's understandable, but I like the idea of having different food trucks there. It keeps it fresh. It's almost like something that when you go there, be like, oh, what kind of food truck?
I even ran
Almost,
power so that they didn't have to run generators. Like I got a big long tech cable and wired in another breaker for them so that they could plug in all their coolers and systems so that they didn't have to run the generator and could kind of be there, and donated that power just to have them there, because it does. One of the aspects that we find without having food, a lot of our regulars will skip, and they know, every Friday we have pizza, and we try to accommodate. We have some snacks and stuff, but for the new customer, it is nice to have that, and I wish we had it all the time. And that is the eventual dream, but at this stage, it's just more time than I'm willing to give it.
I don't mean to like be taken away. I just looking at something here. This doesn't looks like my video took off. So I'm just
Uh-oh.
wondering if it's still recording and I just don't see it because it says it's recording or what. But
Well, it says active on your screen.
yeah,
So
and this says it's recording. I just don't see pictures. Try sharing a screen here. And we'll go back to your
technology.
I know it's a good thing, but I'm telling you, it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, unfortunately.
Hopefully this is freaking sharing. But let's go to I guess your website quick. Is there something you want to actually, one of the things here that this I thought was neat was your questions, facts and questions. What on here? Did you know? Oh, look at this. It's a need to know basis and you need to know.
There
Oh,
you
I
go.
thought it was that you don't know what you know at first is what you're going to say. But is there anything you want to point out on your website here?
No, it's just a decent resource if you want to learn a little bit more about us or about our journey. To be honest, the best way is to come on in and try some beers.
Yeah.
If you've never tried craft beer, I would definitely suggest coming in. And again, we have lots of different drink options. We had lots of Christmas parties over the Christmas season.
What about ordering online? Do you sell this stuff?
Yeah, we've done some orders. To be honest, it didn't really take off. It was something that we did over the pandemic where you could order and then kind of pull up and take it without having the contact aspect.
Oh yeah.
It was just looking at ways of surviving the pandemic, to be honest. Obviously, we have all of our cans in house. You don't have to buy a 6-pack. You don't have to buy a 6-pack of the same beer either. You can buy them individually. So one of the things that we've noticed has become incredibly popular is getting the mix packs. So coming in and getting 12 different beers and giving that as a gift rather than the growlers or some of the other things. We had lots of companies as gifts to their staff bought a whole whackload of mixed 6-packs that they can give out.
That's a good idea.
It just allows you to try different things, because that's the biggest thing about craft beer, and that giving aspect. I love it. I wanted to touch on that briefly. A shout out to our Fort St. John Firefighters Charitable Society. On the giving, we had the opportunity, thanks to the incredible generosity of our community, to bring Christmas to a bunch of families that weren't going to have Christmas, that were nominated by other community members. So we brought in trees and gifts and turkey dinners and dropped that off last night. Just again, as that we're in this together aspect, and that giving aspect. I love when I see companies wanting to give gifts for their staff, knowing that, this is someone that allows your business to thrive. My business is nothing without the people that allow it to happen. I am a full-time firefighter. I have, I teach jujitsu. I have a family and all these other responsibilities. And without that gratitude and that humbleness to realize that I'm certainly just one person in this endeavor, it takes a whole village. It takes an incredible team to bring that forward. And it's cool to see the businesses that choose to do that for their employees, and just a little appreciation for the hard work that so many people donate to somebody else's abundance.
I definitely have seen that. I think over the years, where the community, when they see a genuine need for something, they are more than happy and willing to come together, and it's really cool to see that, because it when when there's a common goal like that, it's powerful. It's actually shocking to see the volume of support when there's something that I think the general public feel there's a need to help out with, and people feel like they actually have a place and the ability to be a part of that. You just give them some direction as to where they can, come together and help out. It's pretty
Oh,
crazy.
being involved with the charity, it's been incredible to see how well this year's a great example for our firefighters charitable ball. We used to run the charity ball under the umbrella of the BC Burn Foundation, which is a incredible foundation that supports burn survivors throughout our province. We've sent locals to it. They run burn camp. Fort St. John firefighters actually raised money. We have a named room in the Burn Foundation Recovery Center. So in Vancouver, or I forget what street it's on, but if you ever have a chance, we have a burn building there that has a recovery, very similar to the Ronald McDonald Foundation.
Oh, okay.
So if you're going through recovery for burns, it's a painful, time consuming, agonizing process. And one of the things that makes it most challenging is being disconnected from your family. And so we sponsored a room, one of the multiple rooms that they have, so that your family can come and stay with you through that process. We find people heal so much quicker when they have the support of the people they love there with them. So they have kitchens and shared spaces, and it's all to the health standards that are required, and it's close to the hospital, and it's a wonderful thing. But once that building was built, one of the things we found is, the Burn Fund was just looking for an endowment to continue to raise money for their own foundation, and we saw a need locally for some of those fundraising dollars that we were doing. So we started our own charitable society, and now support locals. So we have a medical travel program. We do the Christmas draws. We do school bags for kids that don't have school supplies. And through supporting local, we've been amazed at how many businesses have reached out. So I'll loop back to the charitable society this year. We did our charitable ball, first event since the pandemic, and Rumble Industries really took a liking to what we were doing, and they're a newer, successful business in the area, and they really helped us push our ball to a whole new level.
Shout out to Rumble.
Yeah, well,
Right?
and not just them, Home Hardware. To be honest, so many companies now just come by and drop off checks. We used to have to do barbecues and flip burgers or do these long time consuming fundraising events. And now we have, through the work that our charitable have done, businesses just wanting to make a difference, and we can write them a charitable receipt. We can give them that tax benefit. But really, I think that's so secondary to wanting to make an actual difference in our community. We raised over $100,000 at our charitable ball this year,
Wow.
all of which stays local, benefiting our residences in,
How so?
typically.
Actually, let me just pause this and continue on. I
You want to make
want
sure
to I
everything's
want to know.
working?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, there you go. Good episode. There's definitely more to come. I hope you guys are still interested in listening, and thank you for watching up to this point. One of the places you can find the rest of this episode would be on Apple Podcasts, and this is any podcast platform. I think there's about 18 here, but there's Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, iHeart. The list goes on. There's a bunch here I haven't never even honestly listened to or heard of before, but it doesn't matter what the platform. Down here, there's Overcast, Castbox, Good Pods. Anyways, just Google Kevin Unscripted. You'll find it. And thanks again, guys. And we'll talk to you later.